Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel Fanfiction podcast. Today we will continue our exciting journey of what if Deku became a mischievous supervillain. Before we start, please like, share, subscribe, and comment in the comment section for anything you would like to change. Chapter Notes. Issue 25, Dawn of the First Day. See the end of the Chapter 4. Notes. The Mastermind Task Force sat in their shared office. It's been a while since we've heard anything from the League of Supervillains. Death Arms sighed. The rest of the heroes there nodded in agreement. Apart from present MIC's radio show, they hadn't surfaced. They'd been dealing with other villains that had appeared, but it always felt odd dealing with regular villains after the League's theatrics. Not that they wanted the League of Supervillains to appear. Kamu Woods frowned. What nefarious deeds are they planning? He muttered. Mount Lady and Death Arms side-eyed each other. Izuku Midoriya fretted over his bag. Okay, do I have everything? Notebook, pencil case, all might. Keyring, other keyring dash. Everything seemed to be in order. He hastily tied his tie, the skinny piece of fabric somehow deforming into a fat, stubby nub. He practically ran downstairs, giving his mother a cheerful greeting before he sat down to eat. Kaken was sitting at the dining room table with his typical long-suffering look. Good morning, Kaken. His best friend sighed, watching Izuku crack his raw egg on top of his rice, accompanying it with a few dashes of shoyu. Get your ass in gear, nerd. His cheeks full, Izuku blinked slowly, then looked pointedly at Kaken's bowl. His friend didn't look him in the eye. I said I'd eaten already, auntie. His mom just shook her head. Nonsense, Katsuki-kun. You're a member of U.A's hero course. Who knows what you're going to be doing today? Kaken sighed. It's just gonna be the orientation day. They are not gonna do crazy stuff. Izuku finished his breakfast, rocketing from his seat to the door. Let's go, Kaken. We dash. He stopped, face falling when he heard his mother sniffling. Mom, are you okay? For an answer, she dabbed the tears from her eyes, smiling. It's just, I'm so proud of you. Izuku. Izuku felt his eyes welling up with tears as well, but he had to stay firm. After all, if both of them started crying, then they'd have another flooding complaint from the neighbors. Kaken grabbed him by the shoulder, dragging him out bodily. Get going, nerd. Izuku just nodded, smiling. Idly he fingered his Endeavor keychain. At Gentle's house, Izuku's double-checked the lab. Let's see, we've got the Deku backup. Everybody's gear has been repaired, and of course, he stood in front of the other special project. Looks like it's all working. This part of the garage had been refurbished, to an extent. While most of the space was dominated by the Mastermobile, there were a couple of others. Both Izuku and his double had been working like maniacs in the free time that the true Izuku had left. Ideas that would have been impossible without a second genius were now accessible. The double stopped in front of one of the bigger long-term projects. A silly thing that would have taken much longer without two of him. Maybe not this plan. That should come later. He looked outside, into the vacant lot. From the outside, it looked abandoned due to a combination of clever fencing and tarps. Inside, it housed the largest project they'd made together. Mastermind has been quiet recently. We need to get some good old-fashioned supervillain hijinks back into our system. He started to cackle. Outside the lab, Gentle Criminal and La Brava traded worried glances. Once more, thunder boomed. Mwahaha. MWA ha ha ha. The support classroom itself seemed pretty small. About 16 workbenches were placed in front of a lectern. A couple of other students were standing there as Izuku came in. His face brightened as he saw Mai and Mayumi. He plopped his bag down next to them, grinning. Good to see you guys. Mai gave him a manic grin. Good to see you too, Midoriya. Across from her, Mayumi rubbed her temples as Izuku and Mai grinned manically. You guys are way too enthusiastic for this. She didn't outwardly react when Izuku's head whipped around to see her. How could we not be? We're get to work at U.A. The rare materials. Mai's grin widened as she stared at some inner paradise. The superior lab equipment. The specialist help. The possibility of entering an internship with a major company. Izuku and Mai's grins stretched the limits of the human mouth. The classroom door opened and the chatter died down, Izuku barely restraining a fanboy shriek as he saw Power Loader walk through the door. Oh yeah, every teacher here is a pro hero. This is it. I will die a happy man here. Power Loader gave them a calm stare. Welcome to your homeroom. Well, as you know, my hero. Name is Power Loader, but you can refer to me as Majima-sensei. I'm the head of the support department, though my focus is specifically on the invention track. He tapped a couple of keys on his laptop. Invention may seem be the biggest name in the support, but without the other tracks we wouldn't be effective. Izuku nodded. He'd gone over the support section of UA's website and had inspected each stream. Many times. Support. Typically understood to just be about building flashy and large inventions for the heroes. But there is a lot more to it than that. I checked the other pathways in support. Invention was obviously what I'd chosen, but there were a few options available for application. The first one was design, focusing on the costumes themselves, integrating cutting-edge materials with the brilliant inventions that the others produce. Then, there's the other side of support, not necessarily technical, but still important. Sharing some classes with the business course, there are students who enter support who aim to help heroes and the public in general in ways not rigidly defined by invention or design. Lunch Rush is an example of a hero like that. Helping others by making nutritious, high-quality food is Lunch Rush's motto, and at least a few students emulate that spirit. The support course for UA has always had the freedom to decide how it helps. Quirks that can be used for healing or extremely rare warping quirks can apply for a special license to use their quirks to help others without entering heroics. Support also offers the chance for support course members to go on the track of being a support hero, frontline technical support and pros in their own right, merging some classes with students in the hero classes. I'm sure I wouldn't be able to do that, since I'm quirkless. People would ask questions about how I was so good at fighting. And besides, I don't want to draw too much attention to myself. Power Loader tapped to a different slide. Then there's supply and materials, which shares some classes with the business track. Lunch Rush likes to help those students get a foothold. There's always a couple of students every year who focus on helping heroes in that fashion. His gaze swept the room. In 20 minutes, we'll attend the opening ceremony. Before then, familiarize yourself with this room and your workbenches. You've all passed the lab safety tests. Somehow, Mayumi muttered under her breath. But be aware that any unsafe lab procedures will result in you getting detention and being banned from working in the lab until you show willing to listen to safety procedures. He directed a knowing look at Mai and Izuku. Mai looked like somebody had murdered her firstborn child in front of her. Izuku could completely understand unsafe lab procedures, as if either of them would jeopardize their lab time with something like that. Narahata Bank had gone through quite a bit over the past 5 years. With the Villaon factory incidents culminating in the anonymous incident, they had experience with villains. The workers were not completely surprised. Therefore, when a massive cloud of green smoke poured through the doors, Mr. Warp and Gentle Criminal came through, flanking the shorter figure of Mastermind. The armor that Mastermind wore shone dark red, contrasting with the teal waistcoat and cowl. It fluttered in its own wind, Mastermind stepping forwards. Everybody stay calm, for we are robbing this bank. The cashier gave him a flat stare as he came over to the counter with a bag in hand. Please, put as much money in here as you can. After a shared glance, the cashiers started to load up the bags. You've really got to be dumb, robbing a bank in the crawler's hometown. Mastermind paused. Well, we've gone here before. Besides, the crawler's in America right now. Still, the rest of the League of Supervillains started to hustle, making sure that they had everything. Izuku's eye twitched. This was an interesting form of torture. After they'd familiarized themselves with the layout of the classroom and where everything was, Power Loader had taken the class off to the entrance ceremony. Mai and Izuku had been lost, casting a longing glance at the labs. He'd been quite curious about the empty chairs on stage. Not just that, it seemed like there were less students than there should have been. Seeing the teachers introduce themselves and the subjects they taught had grabbed his fanboy side and had refused to let go. Present MIC, Ectoplasm, Midnight, 13, Vlad King, Hound Dog, the list of heroes just kept on coming. And then Nedzu had started to give a speech. Well, hello students. Am I a mouse, a bear or a dog? Who could know? But I am the principal of UA, Nedzu. UA's legacy has gone back to practically the beginning of quirks appearing. Izuku had been excited at first, rapidly writing notes down as the principal talked. It was a rare privilege to listen to a super genius of Nedzu's caliber. That had been the first 10 minutes of speech. Then it just kept going. Mai had pulled out a sketchbook and was idly doodling new designs, only her leg bouncing betraying her impatience. Other students were in various stages of boredom, checking their phones, whispering conversations to their friends, a couple even having fallen asleep. Izuku was still keeping notes, but he just wanted to get into the labs already. The speech had been going for close to an hour when Nedzu finally wrapped it up. I've gotten ahead of myself a bit. He clapped his hands, startling a few students. You may have noticed that there are 2 empty chairs here. The first one belongs to Aizawa Shouter, the teacher of Class 1A. Currently he is busy with his students. A knowing glint entered his eyes. The second chair, well, hear it from the man himself. Who was it? Izuku blinked. Ha, ha ha ha. Izuku's eyes widened as the laughter echoed around the auditorium. Could it be Dash? All Might flung the curtain aside, striding forth. I am here to mold the future generation of heroes. Izuku and several other students shot out of their chairs to give All Might a resounding cheer, the other heroes not seeming to react. All Might took his seat, Izuku barely managing to sit down as his legs threatened to give out on him. At least he was doing better than that one fan who frothed at the mouth and fell unconscious if he ever saw All Might. All Might. All Might was here. In UA. All Might was going to be teaching his arch-nemesis to be a hero. A huge smile split his face as the teachers started to gather their classes together. Mastermind and the League of Supervillains were dealing with the heroes that had shown up. MWA ha ha ha. Why bother, foolish heroes? Mastermind ducked under a hero's swung mace, touching his opponent. With a mighty ZAP, the hero was sent careening backwards from the force of the shock. The rest of the league was having a similarly easy time. Gentle Criminal practically danced around. Attacks, blocking with his cane here and delivering a smart rap there. Golden Grin's blast knocked a charging hero into a group behind him, the villain barely breaking his stride. Inkblood swung her mallet at Death Arms, the other hero barely managing to block her attack before he punched her solidly in the face. Practically bouncing back, she grinned, the other heroes on the scene staying wary. That all you got? Why? Hoping for more. Mastermind whipped around. Oh. Standing there with a huge grin on her face was Ms. Joke, already glowing. 'Cause I gotta say, she leaped forwards, reaching into her side pouch. That wasn't even the punch line. The league traded glances. Inkblood cautiously raised her mallet. What dash? Sproing. Ms. Joke grinned as a boxing glove on a spring knocked Inkblood in the face. That's the punchline. Mastermind giggled, then coughed, trying to regain composure. Oh okay. We need to go. La. Bravi. Her response came through immediately. I love you guys. Ms. Joke frowned as the league was surrounded by the bright yellow energy. Come on, that's no fun. She grinned, her boxing glove retracting. Guess I've got to win back the crowd. Ah. Izuku hummed cheerfully, sitting at his desk in 1F. The other students murmured, trying to recover. After the events, a minute or so after All Might's hasty reappearance, the missing class had come in, with their teacher, sweating yet triumphant. The rest of the students gave them weird looks. The missing teacher, Eraserhead, and wasn't Izuku a mixture of excited and nervous seeing that, was quietly glared at by the other teachers. This quickly turned to a look of amazement. Present MIC clearly wanted to say something but had been restrained. After that was a brief orientation session, going over the various facilities UA had to offer. Maybe Eraserhead had planned this. And now they were back in 1F, Power Loader giving them a cheerful look. Well, we have some leftover time to get to know each other. So, you all know who I am. He gave each of them a calm look. So, we'll have some introductions, name, specialty, quirk, that kind of thing. He snapped a finger at somebody seemingly at random, a gray-haired student who looked like he would rather be asleep. You first. The guy yawned. Right. He went from slumped over to a more upright position. My name's Harigane Kiyu. I'm specializing in electronics, particularly LCDs. My quirk's punk metal, I can turn my hair all metal and spiky. That said, he slumped back into his chair. The next student was short and chubby, with neon green curly hair and a serious look on his face. All right, my name's Saibu Khan. I'm a goddamn healer. My quirk is called stem cell production. I make stem cells and put them into people to help them heal. His neighbor stood up with a dramatic flourish. His fingers were long with large tips like a frog's. His long lilac hair practically glittered. Greetings, everybody, he shouted. The next big name in costume design is going to be Murakami Hisoki. My quirk, psychometry, means that I can see the history of anything I touch. Zuku had wondered how the next student functioned. Their head had no visible nose, ears, or mouth, instead looking like a long thin Lego brick with tiny eyes. Looking closer, he could see that there was a faint seam where his mouth was as he talked woodenly. I'm Shiraishi Brock, and I transferred. Here from Denmark. Nice to be meeting you. He bowed politely. My quirk is blockhead. I specialize in design costume. Please do not mess up my desk. The next student was interesting. They wore a helmet over their head, covering up any facial features, along with metallic gloves. Nice to meet everybody. My name's Hidaka Junetsu, and I'm wearing this for everybody's protection. My quirk is hot head. My entire head is on fire. The more excited I get, the hotter my fire becomes. He idly fiddled with a pencil. I'm aiming for costume stuff. I really like working with heatproofing. I didn't like my original helmet, so I made this one myself. As he sat down, the girl next to him stood up, body language nervous. The other students had been wary of her, considering she looked like a merger of a human and spider, 6 arms tapped there, fingers together. She wore a pair of glasses whose lenses had to be an inch thick. She was also the tallest in class. Izuku reckoned that she had about a foot on the other person. My name's Kobayashi Kumoko, my quirk spider silk, meaning I can make my own silk and have other spider properties. I really want to work in textiles for costumes. She quickly sat down. The next person up was reasonably muscular, with spiky black hair and gray eyes. Yo, the name's Kuroyami Tanso. He grinned, showing off sharp teeth. My quirks. Graphene. I can turn the carbon in my body into graphene, giving me a devastating attack and impenetrable defense. In 1A and 1B, 2 students suddenly sneezed. He grinned. I'm working in the invention track, but I'm hoping to enter the support hero track. There's nothing manlier than helping others. He sat down. The girl next to him stood up with a confident smile, with long wavy blue hair and eyes. My name's Kitogawa Nomi. It's nice to meet you all. She held out a hand. My quirk's called water carrier. I can make about a cup of water in a handy drinking vessel. With a flash of blue light, a glass of water appeared in her hand. My specialty is in coding, so if you need a robot army or a website hacked, I'm your girl. The next student gave everybody an acidic glare. Her skin was blue, with lank green hair and yellow eyes. Oh, my name's Kagaku Ayami. My quirk's called chemical. I secrete various chemicals from my body. I specialize in chemistry. That was it. The next boy sighed, rubbing the back of his head while organizing his desk. Well, my name's Udakiki Ikayaru. My quirk's pretty obvious, double arms. I'm pretty interested in both costumes and tech. I don't think I'm better at either. It's nice to meet everybody. The girl next to him laughed. Muscular, with gunmetal gray skin and brown hair tied up in a ponytail. She gave off an air of practicality. Sure is. My name's Chiba Tsuzuru. She held up a hand, the appendage slowly morphing into a hammer. My quirk's called Handigirl. I can transform my hands into various tools, hammers, pliers, you name it. The boy next to her was short and built like a sumo wrestler, with rosy cheeks and a blonde buzz cut. Well, my name's Ryuri Hiroshi. My quirk's edibility. I can make anything edible and nutritious, though it doesn't necessarily taste good. I'm in invention, but mostly I'm working to make my quirk's products actually taste fucking delicious. His neighbor snorted, getting up. She was curvy with short, spiky black hair and red eyes. Mind your language. Everybody started at the sound of Majima-sensei's voice coming out of a girl's mouth. She grinned, before clearing her throat, speaking in a slightly echoey voice, as if she was speaking through an old-style microphone. I'm Mochizuki CEU. As you just heard, my quirk, vocal changeling, lets me mimic anybody's voice. I'm specializing in sonic technology and present MICs. My favorite hero. Sayu was up next. My name is Sayu Mayumi. I've been responsible for keeping my best friend from blowing up our school. My quirk is called handportation, because my dad thinks he's funny. I have the amazing ability to teleport something from one hand to the other. I have weight and size, limits on what I can do, but that's about it. She politely bowed. My speciality is in robotics, and I'm really looking forward to working on UA's stuff. Since there's 2 chaos gremlins here in the labs, we're all doomed anyways. I might as well enjoy myself. Mai shot up next with a grin on her face. The name's Hatsume Mai, and you'll see Hatsume Industry products on all of the top 10 heroes soon enough. I don't really have one area of speciality. My quirk is called Zoom, and with it I can focus on things up to 5 kilometers away. Her expression dimmed. And I'm going to take out that goddamn stealing jerk mastermind, once and for all. If you're interested in helping me stop him, I have some dash. Power Loader coughed. That will be enough, Mai. Izuku swallowed. He shakily stood up. My name's Midoriya Izuku. I'm in the invention track, and I like analyzing quirks, and I'm quirkless. He sat down hurriedly. There were some murmurs from his classmates. Mai was the first to speak. Meh, who cares about it? Just make your babies as amazing as you can. Back at the hideout, Mastermind and the rest of the league heaved deep breaths. Well, that was dangerous, Izuku breathed, pulling off the suit. At this point, it was just a routine to get everything hidden. Twice pushed himself up from the couch. I'll say, meh, that looked easy. I could have done it in my sleep. Mastermind shrugged. Well, we were able to hold on to more loot than the last time we went against Ms. Joke. Ever since Ms. Joke's initial appearance and the revelation that love worked to counter Outburst, Mastermind had been preparing countermeasures, mostly in the form of plans, get La Brava to declare her love for the whole gang, then get the hell out of Dodge while they couldn't be affected. Twice slumped a bit. Kinda wish I was out there with you guys. Izuku's copy stopped. Oh, right. Sorry about that, Bubaigawara-san. I really should have thought of that. La Brava and Gentle Criminal traded a glance. Gentle patted twice on the shoulder. We'll think of a plan to include you for next time. Don't worry. Jin gave them all a grin. You guys, cut out the mushy crap. The copy mastermind checked his phone. School's out. His face split into a grin. I can't wait to hear how my first day went. See you later, Midoriya. Izuku waved goodbye to Mai and Mayumi. Mai had apparently saved up for the student accommodation UA provided, with Mayumi dragged along to stop her from experimenting without supervision. See you guys later. Mai laughed maniacally. See you tomorrow, Minion. Oh, I'm going to make so many babies. Mayumi slapped a hand to her face. Izuku gave Mai a thumbs up. He knew that he was going to be working on so many interesting projects. Izuku met up with Bakugo with a huge grin on his face. Kakin, can you believe it? There's heroes everywhere. Bakugo snorted at that. It's fucking hero school in Japan, nerd. There's going to be heroes. There. Izuku shook his head. I mean, it's one thing to know about it, but it's quite another to experience it. Kakin. His friend rival arch-nemesis grunted. Whatever. With a broad grin on his face, Izuku started to try and check with his arch-nemesis. So, how was your first day? Make any friends? Bakugo scoffed. Idiot. I'm not here to make friends. What a load of shadash. Yo, Bakugo. Izuku turned with a friendly smile. Bakugo glared at the red-haired newcomer. Shitty hair. That got Izuku to gasp. Kakin, you actually bothered to give him a nickname. The other guy just laughed a bit, grinning widely. Well, the name's Kirishima. Nice to meet ya. Izuku bowed. Nice to meet you. Bakugo scowled. Fuck off. Kirishima just laughed at that. Yep, thought you'd say that. Anyways, I'll see you tomorrow. Bakugo. Keep up the manly attitude. Bakugo's scowl lightened just a fraction. Fine. See you then, shitty hair. Piss off. As the other boy left, Bakugo scowled at Izuku, who had an amazed look on his face. Wow. Kakin. You like him. I do not. Fuck off. Izuku grinned as they made their way back to the train station. One day Kakin admitted. So, about your first day. That got Bakugo to scowl harder. All right. So first of all I have to deal with some shitty elitist nerd jock for putting my feet on the desk. Fortunately he turned his fucking stick-up ass attitude on some purple-haired jerk. Then the hobo teacher gets out of his sleeping bag and tells us we have to go do this stupid physical assessment shit. Izuku got stars in his eyes. Wow. You were in Eraserhead's class. Bakugo snorted. Fucker tells us we can use our quirks however we want for them, and the lowest scorer gets expelled. I wasn't worried because I fucking aced that shit. Then, it turns out it was a goddamn logical ruse, or some shit. Fuck that guy. Some of those idiots must have been pissing themselves and I don't want to deal with that bullshit. Eraserhead sounds like a harsh teacher. Yeah, really fucking harsh. Gave a couple of idiots a hard time. Some purple-haired kid and some blonde girl. That stopped Izuku short. Oh, you're in the same class as Melissa. That's great. She was telling me how she'd been training with Toshinori, you know, the guy from the beach, and that was because she had a similar quirk Tohimanda Twazalata Bloomerangeton Legotinitus before the exam dash. Bakugo slapped a hand on Izuku's mouth. Talk normally, nerd. With a quick breath, Izuku repeated what he'd said at a more normal pace. I mean, I'm a bit jealous. But quirks do that sometimes. I think her quirk's a throwback to the second or third generation of quirk users. First generation quirks usually didn't manifest until you were in your 20s. What? Fuck that. Izuku's day had been pretty exciting as well. Everybody in his class had been pretty chill about the quirkless thing, which made Izuku think that their school had just been a terrible place overall. They'd gone over some of the fundamentals of good support tech and costume design, and had some lab time to build. Izuku and Mai had pumped out a couple of items after only 1 or 2 explosions each. Power. Loda had been enthusiastic about the gear they'd created, though he'd warned them about the explosions. Mayumi had been worried for some reason. Izuku couldn't think why. Explosions were just indications you were on the right track. Eventually, they reached their stop, Izuku waving Bakugo goodbye as they headed to their homes. See you tomorrow, Kaken. Don't fucking die, Deku. After a long talk with his mum about his day and a celebratory dinner of katsudon, Izuku sat back in his lab. Carefully locking the door, he turned the master computer on. How's it going, meh? On the other end, his reflection smiled. All good. We managed to rob a bank and dodge Ms. Joke. And I've made progress on the coolest project. He waved at a large, tarped object in the background. Izuku smiled. That's great. Now then, let's do some transfers. He pulled out his Endeavor keychain. With a swivel of the head, a USB popped out. Slapping it in, he checked over the audio files. This is gonna take a while, meh, even though it was only the first. Say. Sure, he loved UA, which was why he decided that him and his double would trade places every so often, mostly on days with no free lab periods, so that there would be minimal risk of explosions or breaking bones. Just to make sure that there was minimal changeover, he'd recorded everything. Using his keychain, broadcasts out would have been too risky. On the other end of the video call, Gentle Criminal whistled. Impressive. With a mischievous grin on his face, Izuku nodded. It should have picked up all the audio from my classes. I've also got my notes. Twice gave Izuku a grin. Nice one, boss. But if you change too much, then your cop will become unstable. You really don't want that to happen. Copy. Izuku grimaced. Fair enough. Izuku gave a sad smile. I know that I'm probably not going to be able to hold that off, Bubaigawara-san. But both Ms. do need to stick around so that we can make the best gear we can. His villain phone rang. Izuku fumbled to pick it up, pulling his helmet back on. Mastermind here. Ah, this is Bishijima. Mastermind grinned under his helmet. What's up? I guess. I'm signing up for the League of Supervillains. Chapter end notes. This one took a while. From making new OCs with quirks, personality, and names, as well as figuring out what the fuck I'm doing and returning to the OG concept, this one took a long time. That, and I also decided to write a buffer chapter. I think I said this before, but any Hero Core stuff is going into a side history of its own because that will be just remixing canon. Maybe adding some things, removing others, but basically the same. Next time, we'll have baby making. Yay. Chapter notes. Issue 26, Support Shenanigans. See the end of the chapter 4. Notes. Izuku Midoriya, or rather his double, was pumped. Second day at UA, and he was already hyped. And ready for action. Phase 2 of the plan seemed to be coming along nicely so far. With Mastermind having attacked while he was at school, he'd created an alibi just in case somebody was planning to track him down. The pair of them had really enjoyed the new knowledge he had gained, with Double being more excited than when he'd been experimenting on Erasia's energy signature. After school, he'd decided to switch with the real Midoriya. A quick word to their mother about after-school work and they were able to make the switch. Real. Double frowned. Maybe thinking of the real Midoriya was an annoying prospect, but it was accurate. There was definitely a clear division of clone and real. But enough about that. With a cheery wave to Mai and Mayumi, everybody sat down, ready for the day to truly begin. Power Loader greeted everybody and made the roll call. Then the regular classes started. Supports classes focused primarily on helping their students become the best creators they could. Izuku had breezed through the material in school, then devoted a lot of attention to researching off the internet. UA was going to teach both of him so much. Chemistry. Double whistled when he saw his lab partner Kagaku work, seeing the taciturn girl mix chemicals, together with a hawk-like eye. When she glared at him, he hurriedly returned to his work. Sorry. You're really good at this. I have to be. The chemicals I make within my body are extremely hazardous and have to be carefully monitored. She briefly looked away. Your friend seems to be having fun. Double looked over at Mai as she cackled, Udakiki trying to keep her under control. Out the corner of his eye, he could see Power Loader slowly reaching for a fire extinguisher. She'll be fine. Kagaku did not look convinced. Mathematics. Support's mathematics course was perhaps closer to engineering or physics than regular high school. Mathematics. Focusing on the principles of stresses and electricity, the material was specifically chosen for its applicability for their chosen discipline. Mochizuki glared at the textbook, slumping in her chair. Maths is hard, she groaned in Nedzu's voice. Next to her, Mai grinned. Don't worry, prospective minion. Let's see what you're having trouble with. Without changing position, Mochizuki pushed her paper over. Mai scanned it, then put it back down. With a huge grin. I see. Yeah, that one's hard. So, for this one, you're gonna need to do this. The rest of the room boggled at her. She stared at them all. What? If I can't make good calculations, then I can't make my babies the best ever. Everybody got back to work after that. Mayumi just sighed, used to dealing with Mai's eccentricities. Modern hero art history. Double and a couple of other boys flushed when they saw who was teaching them. Midnight gave them all a grin. So, welcome to modern hero art history. She paused, looking over the class. Now, I'm gonna guess the biggest question you've got on your minds. Chiba raised her hand, a bored look on her face. Yeah, I was kind of wondering why we needed to take this class. Midnight frowned. Asking a question like that so impetuously, she suddenly grinned. I like your honesty. She slapped the whiteboard. Basically, because it's not enough to make the best stuff on the market. You've got to understand aesthetics and branding. You guys in support have a duty to help the heroes become superheroes after all. She leveled a steely gaze out at the students. Now, what would you say is the difference between a hero and a superhero? Double had a huge grin on his face. Midnight got it. Standing up, he yelled, presentation. Midnight's own grin matched his own as she wrote the word down in huge letters. Hell yeah. You get it, don't you? Murakami gave a thumbs up of his own, glitter shining in the air. Next to Double, Kuroyami gave a shaky grin of his own. The rest of hero art history was a bit plainer, mostly regarding the superhero designs of old, as well as current style trends in the market. Double took co-paste notes, making sure that the Endeavor keychain was properly recording everything. Lab time. Double had a huge smile on his face. When the original had talked about some of what he'd gotten up to yesterday, he'd been so excited to see it with his own eyes. The support labs at UA were designed with close to the best equipment and materials that Japan had. Computer screens displayed changing graphics of the latest designs. The testing range for costumes had various bullet holes and scorch marks littered all over it, clearly the product of some intense testing. Mai and Double glanced at each other. So, Izu, ready to work on the best baby possible. Hatsum. Midoriya Industries style. For an answer, he rolled up his sleeves. The blueprint was there, as were the materials. All that remained was to put it into practice. Let's do it. Yesterday, Power Loader considered lab time to be the most important lesson that the support course had to offer, a generic catch-all term for the various different tracks of support to work on their specialities. The labs at UA were some of the largest in the country and had a large budget. As first-year support students here at UA, what I hope you learn here is how the industry works as a whole. As part of helping you understand how to create excellent support gear, he gestured to the briefcases in front of each student. We will be examining the support gear of the first-year hero students. The class murmured, twitching. Power Loader gave them all a stern look. Just to head any possible tinkering off, we will not be making any improvements to the gear without approval. More than a couple of students groaned. Power Loader shook his head. These items have already been made to order, and the other support classes need to examine them as well. So we're going to be looking at these items in small groups. The blueprints are provided as well, so there is no need to dismantle the items. There was some grumbling from the class, Mai and Izuku grumbling the loudest, but they agreed. I wonder whose support gear you're working on, Mai. Izuku chattered, amiably snapping his case open. Oh, maybe you've got Kaken's. Mai grinned. Your friend who makes explosions. That'd be fantastic. Oh, no. Mayumi glared at her friend. I heard explosions. Am I possibly working on it? Absolutely not. You guys nearly leveled the lab yesterday without anything like that. Mai waved her off. Explosions are part of progress. Anyway, I don't have the explosive guy's stuff. Anyway, I got some guy called Ida. She snapped the briefcase open, giving out a small shriek of joy. When she saw the armor inside, there were similar cries of happiness all across the classroom. Shinsu. Oh, he's put in a request. For a voice changer that isn't electronic. I like him already. Mochizuki crowed in Midnight's voice. Izuku looked at the name on his briefcase. Oh, that's a shame. I'm working on a Hagakyo. Yeah, Hagakyo. He snapped the briefcase open, a happy smile on his face. Then it turned to a frown. Slowly he pulled out the gear inside, a pair of gloves and shoes. He turned them over in his hands, looking for something that would help. Mai looked over at it. That's weird. Where are the other babies? I don't know, this is all I got. Izuku rummaged around, eventually getting the description. Well, let's see what her quirk is. He pulled out his notebook and looked over the description. Oh, invisibility. It makes her entire body invisible, meaning that a regular costume would be a hindrance. It seems based on the quirk registry that it's some form of heteromorphic quirk. A quirk like that would be perfect for an underground intelligence-style hero, allowing for an infiltration into a villain's hideout, faking out other villains, setting up takedowns with other heroes. Mai looked at the gear with a grin. So, she's running around naked. Izuku sighed, putting the gloves and boots back into the why yeah, which, obviously, why not apply for a suit of some kind. The thought of a girl running around naked, he flushed tomato red. A high-pitched whistling sound came from his mouth. Mai shrugged, not looking away from the high-tech armor she was working on. Maybe she likes running around nude. That statement caused Izuku to turn an even brighter shade of red. With that last stuttering exclamation, Mai looked up from her project, patting Izuku on the back. Rapidly. You all right, Mido? Izuku took a shuddering breath. I am fine. Just, he frowned. A friend of mine mentioned that he had a lot of trouble with his quirk, and he got a suit made of his hair so that he could stay in costume. Why didn't she get something similar for her hero outfit? Maybe she didn't know it was an option, Mayumi supplied. If that was the case, Izuku frowned. An idea popped into his head. He raised his hand. Sensei. Power Loader came over, clearly interested. Midoriya gestured at the gloves and shoes. So, he started. This student, Hagakyo, her quirk's invisibility, and heteromorphic, and, well, her costume is just a pair of gloves and boots. Power Loader turned the items over in his hands. A frustrated sigh left his mouth. Izuku fidgeted. So, I was wondering if I could work on something to help her. It's fine if I can't. Power Loader sighed, frowning. Should have expected this. Sometimes clients don't write down everything that they need. mostly because they don't know it's an option. It's easy to get complacent with some stuff like this. He set the gear down, turning to Izuku. Thank you for bringing this to my attention. You can help. Work on it for some extra credit. As part of it, we are going to have to get a hair or skin sample to make a proper suit. Izuku blinked. Well, I do have an idea for support gear already, he murmured. Power Loader blinked. What were you thinking? Izuku hummed, pulling out his notebook. Hatsune looked over his shoulder, crosshairs narrowing. Idly Izuku sketched out a blueprint. Well, this was something I thought about. I just never had the budget or equipment to make something like this. Well, not legally anyway. Duran's contacts hadn't yet been able to find enough nanoparticles to make what he desired. He still had hope. He stopped at that thought. Ah, Majima-sensei, would it be okay? Do we even have this stuff? Power Loader looked over the blueprint, humming as he checked the materials half scribbled up. I see the angle you're aiming for. I do believe we have the necessary materials for it. So many students have tried to create their own invisibility cloaks that some metamaterials are, at least, easy to acquire. He leveled a stern glance at the pair of them. You're going to be on a tight time frame for making something like this. Are you both going to be able to dash? I waved him off. The chance to make an invisible baby, what an opportunity. Power Loader looked between the pair of them uneasily. Follow the safety protocols. It's going to take some time for a full redo of the costume, and you will need approval from both the student and the company to make a modification like this. Izuku and Mai nodded, not really listening. The rest of that period had been spent grabbing equipment and the proper materials. They'd rushed out to grab food, then ran back to the labs. They hadn't just been working on the proper metamaterial. They had also been working on a proper control mechanism and power source to allow the materials to go from visible to invisible. After the day was over and with it the free period devoted to extra lab time, Power Loader had to make sure they left the building. Mai scrabbled at the ground, tears pouring down her face. Moyumi, you can't do this to me. She wailed as Power Loader dragged her out. Moyumi shook her head. Nope. You need to go home, Mai. This is inhumane. Izuku wasn't faring much better, his face a picture of misery as a pair of robots manhandled him out of the lab. Please, let me stay. I've never had a budget this big before. In front of him, the promised metamaterial seemed to shine in the light. The double grinned. Hatsune, I think we're onto something. Mai looked over at his workbench, then grinned. Across the room, Moyumi threw herself under her workbench, the rest of the class watching in confusion. Well, let's try it out. With a manic grin, the double clicked the switch. The fabric in front of them spacked, glowed. A sixth sense for failed experiments tingling, Izuku hurriedly threw himself under the workbench just as it exploded. As the smoke cleared, Mai just grinned. Hell yeah. Nothing like an explosion in the morning to wake you up. Power Loader ran over. You too, dash. Mai waved him off. Hey, that was unpredictable. Double popped back up. We're on the right track. Nanolenses and particles are the key to this. We're just need to stabilize their power output. Hand on face, Power Loader groaned. The pair of you are either going to kill me or make me the happiest teacher on earth. I don't know which. Mai and Double traded grins. Back to it. Lunchtime. The cafeteria at UA was immense, the double of Izuku concluded. Even with how exclusive UA's academic policies were, the place looked like it could house an army. Maybe it was for relief of emergencies. In the line, Double grinned, holding his tray. The real Izuku had described lunch rush food as nearly as good as Mum's. With all of his memories of Mum's cooking, Double couldn't see how that was possible. But had he actually tasted that cooking? He didn't think he'd actually eaten with Mum. Hey, Midoriya. The double blinked, turning around. Oh, Ryuri, how can I dash? An object was shoved under his nose by the round boy. Shut up. Taste this. Double blinked, squinting at it. That's a rock. Covered in, is that teriyaki sauce. That only caused the fatter boy to scowl. I know it's a fucking rock. I'm working on my cooking. Here, taste it. Double reviewed the information the real Izuku had written down for him. A mental note pinged. Sorry. I forgot you could make anything edible with your quirk. Ryuri snorted. Got your head in the clouds. I reckon it tastes good, but I want a second opinion. Double took the rock in his hand. Against all good sense and reason, he took a bite. Rather than break his teeth and cause severe pain, the lump of granite in his hands crumbled like a cookie. He chewed, eyes wide. Oh, wow. Ryuri grinned. I know, right? He kept chewing. It's kind of gritty, and the rock itself tastes a bit weird, but the teriyaki sauce just makes it all work. I added some extra ginger and chili in there. Double swallowed his mouthful. Wow. Do you mind if I keep this? The larger boy shrugged. Keep it. I've got a bunch of teriyaki pebbles to hand out. Got to make sure it's up to snuff for lunch rush standards. Double waved him off. Good luck. After a few minutes, Double had his lunch. Taking a bite of curry and rice, his eyes shot wide open. Izuku had been right. It was nearly as good as Mum's. Close enough to make no odds. I'm so glad I chose not to get katsudon. I don't think I could handle it being close to Mum's cooking. One quick meal later and he was back in the lab with Mai, continuing to work on the special fabric, at least until the robots dragged them back to their regular lessons. Double's mind was filled with ideas to improve the materials they were working on. The rest of the day passed in a blur, each teacher bringing out an initial fanboy reaction before Double got used to working with them. After one last stab in the school labs, and the Double was heading home, meeting up with Kaken. Kaken, how did the heroics class go? Kaken was oddly quiet, glaring at him with no small amount of venom. Double gave him a smile. Did it not go well? For a few seconds, Kaken stayed quiet. Damn it, got him half and half. Double blinked. Half and half. That got Kaken going, the explosive teen just glaring at nothing in particular as he ranted. Fucking, we had this whole fight indoors thing, from All Might, right? Where we have to get a nuke from. These terrorist fucks, and we got this whole grading system based on some bullshit criteria. Double's heart skipped a beat. Oh my gosh, you met All Might. How is he in person? Did he sign anything of yours? Did he shake your hand? Because if he shook my hand I would never wash it. Again dash. Kaken scowled. His all right. Double translated that from Kaken to regular Japanese. So, what happened? Kaken kicked a pebble. What happened? I fucking won my battle, because I'm just that great. But then, the goddamn American with her bullshit strength quirk she can barely control smashes a hole through 3 floors. Like it was nothing. His glare was dark. And then there was that fucking half and half bastard, and his quirk that hit an entire goddamn building. And then Ponytail, with that fucking ridiculous creation quirk. He lapsed into a dormant silence, Double following beside him. Double hedged his bets, still a bit wary of Kaken. So, I mean, you're not calling them extras dash. Fucking damn it. With no small shock, Double could see tears in Kaken's eyes. I can't beat them like this. Shit. I can't measure up to that half and half bastard. Even if I won my trial, I couldn't have beaten that fucker if I was going one-on-one. Double smiled shakily. Internally, alarm bells were ringing through his head. He had to think of a way to cheer up his arch-nemesis, fast. Well, Kaken, they've all gone through the same trial you did dash. I fucking know that, Deku. Looking at Double's face, Kaken stopped, taking a deep breath. Well, whatever. He gave Double a glare. From here on out, I'm gonna fucking crush them all. Internally, Double gave a sigh of relief. Of course you will, Kaken. Say, if you need any help with support gear or need improvements, I can give you a hand. The pair of them sloped off to the train station, Double chattering happily and Kaken shooting off. Sharp responses. There wasn't a stated apology, but Double could see from a slight change that Kaken regretted it. Well, Double would take that. Unseen by either boy, a tall purple-haired teenager watched them leave, the other students who weirdly tolerated him walking to the station. That's a first, he muttered. Next to him, Uraraka blinked. What? Bakugo swearing. Shinso shook his head. I was talking about him actually, you know, being civil. For him, anyway. In the 2 days they'd known him, Bakugo had proven to be rude, violent, and sweary. That he'd also proven to be talented as a fighter seemed somewhat unfair. The heroics lesson with All Might had been interesting, with Bakugo, Melissa, and Todoroki each being movers and shakers in their class. Melissa simply smiled. Ah, so that's Kaken. Chuckling, Shinso kept walking to the station. Yep, sounds like dash. His ears caught up to his brain and Kicked it. His eyes widened. Wait, Kaken. Melissa nodded. Well, I met that other student before, you know, the green-haired one. Uraraka nodded. Right, the plain guy. With a warm smile on her face, Melissa continued. Well, he's not that plain. His name's Midoriya Izuku, and he's a really nice guy. He mentioned that he had a friend who was going into heroics. Kaken. Guess Bakugo fits the bill. Ida chose to butt in, gesturing animatedly. Whoever Bakugo is friends with, it isn't any of our business. Gossip like this does not befit students in the heroics course. Shinsu grinned, hoisting his bag on his shoulder. Probably, dude. But you gotta admit it's surprising. That he has a friend at all. Ida spluttered a bit. All I meant was Dash. Uraraka shook her head. Well, Kirishima's befriended him, right? Somehow, Melissa shrugged. As the rest of them talked around her, Melissa frowned, glancing down at her fist. The improved full gauntlets had worked. They hadn't immediately torn apart from the full force of using her quirk. But she knew that it was a stopgap measure. She still couldn't modulate one for all yet. Even the experience of Shinsu's brainwashing hadn't helped her consciously dial it up. She would have to figure something out. Still, with Uncle Might and friends, she was sure she could do it. It wasn't as if there was going to be a villain attack or anything. In a well-kept bar in Camino Ward, a lanky figure glared at a purple, misty man. There aren't enough mobs here. Why aren't there more? Kurogiri sighed, polishing a glass. Shigaraki, I have tried to tell you, Dash. You put the word out on the street about the League of Villains, right? I did, sir, but Dash. A laugh interrupted their conversation, a large muscular villain snorting into his beer. On his bar stool. Shigaraki stilled. Kurogiri sighed. Shigaraki Dash. Shigaraki stalked over. What's so funny? The muscular villain just laughed a bit more. Going by his flushed cheeks, he'd had a few too many beers. Well, it's just League of Villains? Really? You gonna steal some cakes or something? Shigaraki's head tilted. From what Kurogiri could see of his face, his murderous rage had shifted to murderous confusion. What? Let me guess, you're gonna go onto a plot with a keep off the grass sign and walk around as part of your evil plan. Shigaraki stared straight ahead. Then, viper quick, he gripped the table next to the other man's arm. The villain's laughter quickly stopped as the table cracked and crumbled to dust. The other villains in the bar backed away, clearly terrified yet unable to flee. Annoyed, Kurogiri pulled out a dustpan and brush, set aside for this kind of emergency. Shigaraki leaned forwards, gripping the villain's arm with a pinky outstretched. With a curt gesture, Nomu loomed behind the other villain, cutting off his escape. Hey, do you mind telling me what's so funny? As the villain turned a pale green color and tried to pull away, Shigaraki leaned forwards, teeth bared. I want an answer. The hapless villain whimpered. What? You haven't heard of the League of Supervillains? They're losers, and I thought Dash. Shigaraki glared at the man, who shut his eyes in fear. League of Supervillains? Who the fuck are they? Chapter end notes. Woo, this one took a while. I wrote out a lot of it, then I was unsatisfied, rewrote it and now it's all better. There is real science on Hagaku's, and I'll link to the articles soon. Please comment, it keeps me warm in this dire winter. Next time, we elect a class president. Issue 27, Election Day. See the end of the chapter 4. Notes. The third day of support classes saw the students eagerly twitching in their chairs, waiting for the day to start. Kobayashi and Hidaka were quietly talking about the merits of various materials, other students watching the huge spider girl as her arms swept around her in generous arcs. Izuku grinned at Mayumi, pen flashing as he looked over the blueprints on her desk. Wow, so by using this design you can simulate a human-like intelligence. And you've been working on these since the first day. Mayumi's normally exasperated expression was replaced by an enthusiastic grin. Yeah, I've been working with Kitagawa on the AI cores that UA uses. They are Nedzu's initial design, and the rat really went all out on them. Kitagawa nodded, deep blue eyes sparkling. Power Loader designed all of the robots UA used for heroics. They made that change because parents were concerned about potential damages. Izuku paused. Even the zero-pointer. He'd seen the design. Based on Kaken's description, it hadn't exactly been careful with how it had been moving. Mayumi shrugged. Well, don't blame me. But it's not actually named the zero-pointer. That's more of a designation. She looked around her, then lowered her voice. It's actually called the Majima. Izuku gasped. A new piece of hero trivia. Why's that? Kitagawa shrugged, then a devious grin crossed her face. Maybe it was Sensei's way of compensating for his short height dash. She was cut off by Power Loader slamming a fist on his desk. All right, settle down, everybody. He glared at the suddenly much quieter class before he tapped his clipboard. And for the record, I am not short. I just have a slouch. Izuku privately considered that nonsense, but kept quiet. Power Loader's Napoleon complex had been discussed often on the various hero message boards he frequented. After Power Loader had brought down a villain with a gigantification quirk with excessive brutality, then started screaming at him. Who's the short one now? Izuku had concluded that Mastermind would not be making any short remarks around Power Loader. Their homeroom teacher made the roll call, checking off everybody, then looked around the class. Now then, today is going to be a bit special. That got every student to look up. With all of the work they had done in the labs, they wondered what a special day meant in this context. Knowing UA and the rumors surrounding 1AS homeroom teacher, there was a lot to unpack. Would they be building some sort of training device for the hero? Students. Power Loader gave them all a grin. You're going to choose a class president. That got a lot of mixed responses, ranging from cries for the position to confusion about how mundane this situation was. Izuku wasn't sure what to make of it. That seemed a bit normal for UA. But on the other hand, maybe it was an opportunity. Maybe being the class president meant that you got better chances. Increased responsibilities would probably help in the support business. If Izuku hadn't secretly been a supervillain, then maybe he would have applied for the position. As it was, he already didn't want to draw too much attention to himself. Rigo was the one to ask the question on everybody's minds. So, how should we determine who is class president? Power Loader looked the class over. Why don't you discuss the potential options with your fellow classmates? Izuku briefly wondered why his teacher was taking such a backseat. Then, the answer made itself apparent. Power Loader was giving them a test of some sort. Maybe it was to determine independence. Around him, the rest of the class murmured, thinking about how to decide. Next to him, Mai looked bored. Izuku shuffled over. Aren't you interested in being the class president? Mai shook her head. That'd take away valuable inventing time. If I was founding my own company, then sure I'd be in a leadership position. But I already waste enough time eating and sleeping. Izuku shrugged. He'd briefly toyed with a drug that would reduce the need for sleep and sustenance, only to swear it off when he realized it would mean not eating his mum's cooking. Honestly, I kind of feel the same. I am not really interested in being a leader dash. All right, how about we just put it to a vote? Kitagawa shouted. The other students quieted down as Kitagawa stood up. That's the simplest way of doing it. And just to make sure that we actually get interesting results, no voting for yourself. So we're gonna be writing down our names on our slides? Chiba asked. Kitagawa shrugged. Sure. Or we could ask Murakami to touch the votes, since he can check who touched it. The flamboyant boy nodded, glitter falling through the air. She grinned, looking out at the class. Is that okay, Power Loader? Power Loader grunted. Not bad, Kitagawa. Izuku and Mai traded looks. In the cafeteria, Izuku grinned at Mai. It seems that we chose our class president well. Neither of them had wanted the position, so they decided to vote for who they thought was the best candidate. Izuku had voted for Kitagawa, since it was her idea and she seemed the responsible type. Mai had voted for Mayumi, to the taciturn girl's surprise. In the end, Kitagawa had taken the president position with Hidaka as the vice president. Mai cackled as well, glancing over at Mayumi. What do you think? Mayumi shrugged. Well, at least Kitagawa's sane, and she might help you guys not think about inventing 24/7. In response to that, Mai stared at Mayumi as if she'd just said eating children is ethically responsible. Izuku had gone up to Ryuri, asking for the next creation in addition to his usual lunch, which had turned out to be broken glass with some sort of purple sauce. Edibility was such an incredible quirk. Picking up the shard of glass, he dipped it in the provided sauce and crunched it down. Hey, glass. Under the effects of Ryuri's quirk tastes a bit like potato chips. Cool. I picked up a shard. Really? She crunched a shard, her crosshair pupils focusing on some point. In the distance. Wow. You wouldn't have thought, would you? Mayumi took a breath, then shook her head. You're both weird. Picking up a piece of Ryuri's product, she dipped and tasted it. Not bad. Lunch continued in this way, until the alarm went off. Izuku looked up. What's going on? Security level 3 has been breached. All students, please evacuate in a calm and orderly fashion. Everybody else in the cafeteria was similarly confused. For a brief moment things were calm. Then, there was a stampede to make it to the exits. Izuku looked over at his friends. Level 3. A fleeing student turned in his hurry to run away. Means somebody got into the building. It's never happened before. I'm getting out of here. Who had dash? Izuku got up, Mai and Mayumi trying to follow. Then the crush of the crowd swept them up. Izuku tried to stay abreast in the sea of people. He was briefly happy that his double hadn't gone to school today, since it might have caused him to dispel. Then, everybody, please stay calm. The crowd paused. Izuku looked up, the voice familiar. Could it be Dash? Sure enough, it was the tall teenager with glasses he'd tied up over the toxic chemical vat. Ida. Something. Izuku smiled. It was good to see somebody he'd menaced get into U.A. Just more proof that what every hero needed was an arch-nemesis to drive them further. Mai looked up at Ida as he spoke, crosshairs focusing on him. Well, he's certainly got the proper heroic build. Maybe I should talk to him about gear. Mayumi shook her head. You're just going to use him as a billboard. Izuku sighed as Mai just nodded to that last statement. Still, he could see that Ida was going places. Maybe he was in the same class as Kaken. In a certain bar, an angry manchild glared at the misty figure. Can't believe that some asshole jacked my guild name, he grumbled, viciously tapped the buttons on his handheld console and killed another collection of pixels. Kurogiri sighed. We still have enough manpower to go ahead with the assault on the USJ. Even with the villain you nearly disintegrated. Shigaraki looked up. Why the fuck didn't you tell me about this league of supervillains? This is mostly your fault. Kurogiri stopped polishing the glass in his hand. Shigaraki, I did, in fact, try to tell you. On numerous occasions. I encouraged you to read a newspaper or watch the news among other things. His tone switched to a less polite one. To quote you, Shigaraki, why should I waste my time on the corrupt, hero-obsessed mainstream media when I can get my news from meme websites and video games? Fuck off Kurogiri, I'm playing Minecraft. Shut up Kurogiri, I'm stealing candy from a baby. And fuck off Kurogiri, I'm suicide baiting a VTuber. Shigaraki glared at the misty villain. Well, I don't see why I should. And that bitch had it coming. You should listen to Kurogiri, Tomura. With a yelp, Shigaraki dropped his console. Sensei. He scrambled up to the screen of the television their sensei had set up in the bar. Can you believe it? Some fucking jackass jacked my guild name. Why didn't you tell me? On the other end of the television, all for one side. Tomura, the phenomenon of Mastermind and the League of Supervillains hasn't exactly been hidden. He seems to revel in his publicity and inane antics. That name has been on the underground's mind for a while. I thought you would see the signs. That you have not seems difficult to accept. But sensei, Shigaraki whined. I've been thinking of that name for years. Tomura, complaining won't turn back time, all for one rebuked. Consider this a lesson, reading a newspaper or watching the news is an invaluable form of intelligence gathering. Think of it as reading the patch notes to an online game. Shigaraki pouted, scraping his shoe on the ground. See, that's plain Japanese. Why couldn't you have put it like that, Kurogiri? Kurogiri didn't comment. Shigaraki turned to the screen. I won't let you down, sensei. I'll give you All Might's head on a platter. I wish you the best of luck in your endeavors, Tomura. Use your League of Villains well. If you succeed, nobody will ever think about the other group again. The screen turned off. Shigaraki turned back around to Kurogiri. Kurogiri, let's prepare for the assault. We can't let sensei down. Kurogiri nodded. There are a few more types who would be willing to listen to us. Are you sure we don't need to gather more intel on the students? Shigaraki waved them off. A bunch of snot-nosed NPCs like them. Nah, They are gonna be fodder for our party to use as an XP farm. Why should we worry about them? Kurogiri tried, once again, to make his boss see reason. Sir, we have already suffered from not knowing about other villains. Do you want to dash? His charge had already picked up his game. We have Nomu, don't we? And besides, they are not the target, All Might is. Seeing that he wasn't going to get anywhere else with this discussion, Kurogiri returned to cleaning up his bar. At least Sensei had managed to intervene with sensible advice. In a darkened room, All for One turned to his doctor. You have a photo of his face, don't you? Dr. Yujiko nodded, passing him the screenshots. He looks quite grumpy in them. And I've got his whiny pout down perfectly. All for One looked at the selected images using a rather obscure quirk, and laughed about it for a good couple of hours. The means of encouraging Tomura's hatred of society had resulted in some incredible entertainment, which almost made up for the annoyance of his successor sabotaging himself like this. Still, the League of Supervillains was not a serious threat. All for One was confident he could stamp them out if need be. After another exciting day at U.A., Izuku left Kaken on a different stop. Part-time job, Kaken. His friend Garch Nemesis scowled. Whatever. Don't get yourself killed, nerd. Izuku smiled. That was nice of him. See you tomorrow, Kaken. As his rival left, Izuku grinned, heading off to the League of Supervillains' collective lair. Grinning as he entered, he waved to La Brava. Hey guys, I'm back. La Brava turned from the computer. Good to see you, Izuku. How was UA? His smile nearly split his head. Oh, I've learned so much. I've been working with my on Hagaku's costume, and we're getting close to making it work. La Brava gave him a cheery thumbs up. After hearing about how a teenage girl had been given a costume that consisted of a pair of gloves and shoes, the female villains had been very slightly angered by that. At least they knew what their next target was. That's great to hear. I'm sure she's going to love it. Across the room, Izuku's mirror image looked up from where he was putting the finishing touches on. Something under a tarp. Still having problems with the power output. Beaming, Izuku practically dashed over to his double. Hi, Mia. How was your day? The double gave his original counterpart a wide grin, wiping his hands clean with a rag. Pretty good. Pretty good. I'll show you what I finished. How did it go? Izuku pulled out his notebook and Endeavor recorder. Pretty good. I've got some new notes on the AI systems that UA uses. Double looked over the notes, his smile becoming a little strained. Heh, these are pretty good notes. And look at that. I would have never thought about wiring these up like that. Izuku's smile diminished. Are you all right? Double shook his head. I'm fine. I'm fine. From her spot on the couch, Inkblot looked at the double with a concerned look on her face. Seriously, are you okay? You've seemed a bit on edge lately. On the couch, Bubaigawara had the same expression of concern as Inkblot, probably more concerned. Since it was close to his own personal issues, Double just waved it off. Let's get back to the important stuff. He led Izuku over to the looming erasure ray. It's taken a while and a lot of testing, but we've managed to get the erasure beam down to an easily portable size. I was even able to get the trick down with the different energy signature. Izuku beamed, since he'd really enjoyed working on Erasure's energy signature. That's great. And there, a dash. He gestured to the 10 figures on their respective plinths. The most prominent was huge and muscular. A pair of twin tufts stood up from its head. Double grinned, pointing at the figures. Well, it took a bit of doing, but I was able to get them all operational. That got Izuku to smile. Perfect. Then we can improve their AI cores using these notes. We are definitely going to have to change them up, since Nedzu made them, and I wouldn't put it past him to build a remote shutdown into the system if somebody tried to hijack them, but it should work. Double frowned, tapping the notes again. They would be more autonomous, wouldn't they? Izuku frowned, looking at his double. Look, I know, Mir. You're not okay. Double looked away, before sighing. Sorry, it's just I keep worrying that you're going to try and replace me, you know. And I don't really want to just follow your orders all the time. Reflecting on the various decisions that he'd made without input from his double, Izuku scratched the back of his head awkwardly. Sorry. I'm just, you know, trying to keep Mastermind out there while giving us an alibi at school. Double looked down at the ground, still frowning. I know that. It's just, well, annoying. There wasn't anything Izuku could think to say to that. Out of the corner of his eye, he could see Twice and Inkblot watching both of them. I'm sorry, Mir. I should have been more considerate of your feelings. His double sighed. I am sorry too. It's not your fault. Mastermind's gonna come back, better than ever. The pair of them grinned, then hugged. Inkblot and Twice sighed, backing down. They came apart. Izuku grinning. So, what about Twice enhances? Double grinned, the joy of creation lighting his eyes up. Coming along great. Pointing at a gauntlet. He gripped it. This with the modified boots should simulate a basic strength quirk. Izuku hummed. What about faking a quirk that can only double mundane objects? Double hummed. Maybe. But I thought that we wanted to stay far away from revealing a connection to Twice's actual quirk. With a nod, Izuku argued. But asking Twice to not use his quirk at all is pretty bad. Even if only half, we should incorporate it. Twice, for his part, just grinned, seeing that the pair of Izukus had come to something resembling an agreement. You guys are the best. I'll murder you in your sleep. Inkblot gave him an odd look. Neither Izuku seemed perturbed. Izuku gave a grin. Well, it's been a day. What about? Double gave a grin. I just finished it. It just needs a few more tweaks. But he dramatically swept a curtain aside, revealing the mastermind armor and cloak. Izuku approached it reverently. Behold, our new and improved suit of armor. The new suit seemed sleeker, more refined, its bright red sheen promising Mastermind's particular brand of supervillainy. Over the top, the teal waistcoat contrasted the now black shirt. The teal cape fluttered on its stand, the red hexagons dotted across its length shining. Mastermind's helmet had been streamlined slightly, the mouthpiece now having its lines picked out in glowing green lights. Even the utility belt had been changed slightly with a few new pouches added, glowing green lights separating each pouch. It definitely matched Mastermind's brand, suitably villainous without being completely menacing. Izuku sucked in a breath. You managed to finish it, he breathed. He'd nearly finished it himself. But seeing the completed armor was still a treat. Double grinned, pulling out a datapad and scrolling through it. The armor's been made lighter yet stronger thanks to the gold titanium alloy Jiran helped source for us. I made some similar improvements to the cape and clothes, carbon fibers coupled with similar soft robotics to what we have in the cape to make them even more durable. Not just that, but you added in all of the essential devices and they work. Erase ray, springs, the Double nodded. Yep, plasma reactors online, so everything should work. Izuku smiled. That's incredible. He paused. So, do you want to try it on or Frantically his double shook his head. No. I had the pleasure of working on it all day With a wave of his hand Izuku cut his clone off. It wouldn't be fair. Besides, you worked on it. You should have the first go. His clone shook his head. I know you want to make me feel more involved, but I'm being serious. I wouldn't have finished it if you hadn't been working on it already. Izuku hummed. Well, The double gave him a cheeky grin. Besides, I already tried it on for a bit, so His head whipped around to glare at himself. What? Come on. Double didn't look ashamed. Supervillain, remember. Huffing indignantly, Izuku pulled the suit on. He tapped the heads-up display, gasping in awe as he saw the new possibilities. The camera improvements work then. Night vision, infrared, and an updated energy scanner. Mastermind whirled around. And thanks to the lighter materials, we're going to have more space to add gadgets. The pair of supervillains laughed at that. Double eventually recovered, donning a more serious expression. Well, we're going to need to move quickly. Mastermind paused, adjusting the cape as it billowed dramatically. Oh, why's that? Have they tracked the League of Supervillains to here? Now it was Inkblot's turn to look awkward. Well, La Brava turned around from the computer, a somber expression on her face. We've been keeping an ear out on the underground, looking for the next job and just staying aware. And, apparently, somebody's been recruiting for a League of Villains. She scowled. Somebody nasty. We haven't heard what they were planning, but it seems like it's going to be violent. Mastermind's smile slipped. They're using our name. That's just unacceptable. Double nodded, a a similar frown on his face. Yeah, that's what I thought. We worked hard on this. Mr. Compress nodded. We certainly did. From what I hear of this league, they are recruiting villains, who are really not up to our standards. A lot of really nasty types. Next to him, Gentle Criminal sniffed derisively. Inkblood nodded. She enjoyed a fight and living free, but she wasn't out to cause bloodshed. Sure, violence was a means to an end, to escape from the heroes or proving a point. It wasn't the goal. Izuku frowned. Well, I guess we know what target we're going to hit next. He whirled around, cape, billowing dramatically. Do we have any idea where they are? La Brava gave him a confident smile. Working on it. Mastermind and his double grinned. This league of villains had no idea what they had done. Chapter end notes. Well, I finished this chapter. Now there are 2 of them. Things are certainly heating up. I need comments to live. Without comments there can be no happiness. Next time, we're going to be spying on the criminal underworld. Not just that, but we're going to be in school over the weekend. But before the next chapter, I may or may not write some of the shenanigans of Class 1A and A. Separate work. Stay tuned, for my mood is fickle. Power Loader groaned, running his palm down his face. Not without supervision, and no explosions. I make no promises. Izuku bowed politely to their teacher. I'm sorry, Majima-sensei. We aren't going to blow things up deliberately. Power Loader sighed. Well, at least your potential design was approved by their board after I had a long, productive beating with their designer. Izuku blinked. You mean a meeting, right? Power Loader turned away. Sure, let's go with that. Well, that weekend was reasonably hectic. Trying to maintain a proper balance between my school life and villain life was difficult, but not anything I hadn't been doing for ages now. Sure, it was hard, but Hagaku's costume needed the work. Me and Double had talked about how to manage it when I'd burst back into the lair talking about the work we were doing. In the end, I took one day while Double took the other. One would go in with Hatsune while the other stayed at the lair and worked to improve our gear. We also needed to find some time to talk with their other friends. I hadn't been able to see Melissa, since she took a different train. Working on Hagaku's costume with my proved to be exhilarating, the energetic inventor's approach meshing with my style really well. Despite our differences of opinion on Mastermind, we had one thing in common regarding our devices, which was that we preferred to flick the switch and see how it worked. As for the villain business, at the time I had no idea how bad the disrespect to Mastermind and the League of Supervillains was. All I knew was that I was going to give these villains a firm talking to. So while La Brava and Mr. Compress tracked down the base of this inferior league, we devoted time to upgrading the Mastermind armor further. Thinking of future counters, I decided to spend some time working on some interesting chemicals. Binding attacks were always useful. The main reason I hadn't integrated them into my armor was the difficulty of transportation. But with my armor now lighter and stronger, there was no limit to what I could do. Early next week, for the hero class, the day had gone in a similar fashion to middle school. English, mathematics, just normal school stuff. Admittedly, lunch rush food had been good enough that it made it all worthwhile, but it wasn't life-changing. And so they thought that their study period would be the same. Grind. The first warning 1A had of the madness that was coming was the door slamming open. A pair of students stood in the open doorway, a girl with pink dreadlocks, goggles, and a maniacal grin, and a boy with green hair and a less maniacal grin. His face lit up. Oh, hi Kaken. Hi Melissa. Meanwhile, the pink-haired girl went over to Hagaku. Her eyes focused closely on the invisible girl. Oh, wow. That's pretty intense. Bakugo glared at the green-haired student with a less angry stare than his norm. The rest of the class waited for him to get on the stranger's case. Oh, Izuku. Melissa Shield gave a cheerful wave from where she was sitting. How's the support course been going? Apart from a small collection of students, the rest of the class was filled with silent gossip. Midoriya knew their stupidly strong classmate Melissa Shield personally, and apparently knew Bakugo and referred to him by a cutesy nickname. Who even was this guy? The named Midoriya gave her a cheerful smile. It's everything I hoped for and more. Oh, Eraserhead. It's just Aizawa-sensei while you're here, he said. Their teacher looked the boy up and down. You wanted to borrow Hagaku, right? Midoriya managed to squeak. Why yes. We made improvements to her gear based on my design. And I want to make sure it works before the next heroics class. Hurriedly he pulled a notebook out from somewhere. He extended it out with shaking hands. Eraserhead. Autograph. Please. 1A enjoyed the unusual experience of seeing their normally unflappable teacher look stunned. With an odd look at Midoriya, he slowly pulled out a pen. Holding the book like it was going to explode, he scribbled something in it. Mina pinched herself to see if she was dreaming. The rest of the class was in a similar state of shock. Even Todoroki's eyes had widened a fraction. Hagakure looked up, pointing to herself. My hero gear. Why dash? The girl grinned at Hagakure, gripping her around the arm. Oh, we are going to make so many babies together. Hagakure spluttered. Bakugo facepalmed. The rest of the class stared at the pair of students as if they'd gone mad, which, given the grin on the girl's face, might have been likely. Midoriya snapped out of his fanboy reverie when he heard that. What Hatsume means, Hagakure, is that we've made some changes to your gear and want your approval. Oh, and we'll make any other gear if you can think of it, so please keep us in mind. Hatsume wore a shameless grin. Sure, that's the boring way of putting it. Invisibility was a real challenge. As Hagakure looked between the pair, Melissa looked at her friend with a cheerful smile. I'm interested in how you designed Hagakure's costume. I thought dash. Well, DNA-infused materials would be easy, but it'd be boring dash. Oh, so you've been working on a light dash. Bending costume, yes. I thought about repurposing a holo-emitter dash. The rest of the class watched with trepidation. Kirishima grew concerned when he saw Bakugo twitch. In his chair, other students could see his angry scowl giving way to a look that might have been horrified. Bakugo's head was filled with one thought. Shit, there's two of them. Two goddamn maniacs who rambled on and on about devices at 1,000,000 miles a minute. He'd seen Blondie talk enthusiastically about her gear, but seeing her actually keep up with Deku, Izuku's nonsense? Eraserhead coughed, snapping Midoriya and Melissa out of their lengthy discussion. The green-haired boy bowed politely to Eraserhead. So, Aizawa-sensei, Hagakure, would it be okay? Hopefully we can get some work done before the lesson dash. Since this is a study period, it's fine. Power Loader sent me the details. Aizawa's eyes bored into Midoriya's. I appreciate you going above and beyond what was expected of you in your class. All right, not a problem. He bowed politely to the class. Sorry for disrupting you. Hatsume dragged Hagakure behind her. Come on. We still have so much science to subject you to. And with that, they left. For a few seconds, 1A was silent, just trying to process the events of the last few minutes. Then, Kaminari asked the question that was on everybody's minds. What the hell was that? Hagakure Toru fidgeted under the manic glares coming from both Midoriya and Hatsume. They'd dragged her off to the support labs, Midoriya's grip being disconcertingly strong for somebody who looked as nice and friendly as he did. What's dash? Hagakure, do you know about DNA-constructed materials? The sudden question from Hatsume caused Toru to blink. No, not really. Hatsume looked over at Midoriya with a confused look in her eye. How does she not know about that? Toru looked at Midoriya with a pleading look. At least he looked like he was marginally more likely to explain what was going on than the pink-haired maniac next to him. Could you explain what you're talking about? Please. Midoriya turned to face her, notebook in hand. I'll answer that question with another question. Hagakure-san, do you want to have actual clothes on while still able to use your quirk to the fullest? Toru stilled at that. What? Well, yeah, but, what do you mean? I don't dash. Midoriya sighed. Well, I've been talking to a friend, a senpai here, and he mentioned that he didn't really know about DNA-constructed material until his second year. Caused him a lot of embarrassment. Hatsume grinned. Not public knowledge, unless you've got a really personal and irritating quirk. Can't imagine why it's not talked about more. Toru blinked. You still haven't told me what that's about. DNA-constructed material, I mean. She had a vague idea what it was about, but it was still unclear why they were talking about it like that. Midoriya gave her a polite smile. Well, basically, we make clothes out of your genetic material so that it works with your quirk. It's a bit more complicated than that dash. Hatsume glared at him. What? DNA material is dash. What followed was a stream of technical terms between two people that Hagakure did not understand. The important thing to understand is that it was incredibly technical. Trying to keep up, Toru blinked. So, how do you make it? I'm guessing I have to give you some of my own DNA. Midoriya nodded. Yep, just a bit of hair or skin, and we could make you a suit that is just as invisible as the rest of your body. Well, I say a bit. A few haircuts would be sufficient. The terrifying girl shook her head. But that was the boring, easy way if we had no other options. Midoriya nodded, a manic smile on his face. Right, and we already made you something. He turned to her with a notebook and pen in hand. Now, about your quirk. Toru grinned. This was something that was more her speed. Well, it's pretty obvious. I'm invisible. I guess I never really thought about how it works, except that it does. Hatsune laughed. Don't worry, Mido's a genius quirk analyst. He could tell you things about your quirk you never thought about. Midoriya whined. He then whirled around to Toru, notebook in hand. Well, she's exaggerating. But I have a lot of questions about how your quirk works. Toru gave him an odd look. Well, dash. Midoriya held up a hand. Question. Can you see yourself? Also, could I see your outline if you were wet? Well, yes. And you could see my outline, but I don't think dash. Midoriya was already furiously scribbling in his notebook. That's good. If you couldn't see yourself, it would just mean you were naturally, perfectly transparent. Do you share your quirk with another person in your family? Toru felt like she'd walked into some other alternate reality where nothing made sense. Well, my dad's invisible as well. I inherited his quirk. She blinked as Midoriya pulled out a laser pointer and pointed it at her arm. Why are you pointing a laser at me? Hatsune grinned with him. That's interesting. So her whole body naturally bends light around her. Just like the babies we made. This didn't exactly reassure her. Toru looked between the gremlin and the slightly more sensible boy. Could I dash? Midoriya's grin seemed to split his head in half. Oh, getting the chance to analyze a quirk that passed the UA entrance exam dash. Hatsune's unhinged smile matched his as she pulled out various pieces of equipment. Oh, light. Bending materials are fascinating. I just want to make some more babies for her. Toru took one look at their faces, then decided to cut her losses. No thanks, I choose life. Before she could run, Midoriya's hand wrapped around her arm with the inescapable force of an industrial strength clamp. Hagakure, we're going to make you the best support gear. Hatsune's grin matched his. Agreed. Let the science begin. Hagakure could only shriek in terror as the gremlins descended on her. It was the aftermath of the twin hurricanes Midoriya and Hatsune, and 1A was still recovering. Aizawa-sensei had given them all a glare to get them to calm down, but outside of class they were free to talk. The rest of 1A looked at Bakugo, who returned it with his typical angry expression. Shinsu was the first to speak. So, Kaken, eh? That's a sweet nickname. Bakugo gave Shinsu a glare that could have melted steel. Shut the fuck up, zombie. In response, Shinsu gave Bakugo a leering grin. Having it confirmed like this was pretty amusing. It's a bit too cute for somebody like you, is all. The blonde boy's glare intensified. Well, we grew up together since our moms knew each other and he kept calling me that. Shit annoys me. Kirishima looked at him with a grin. You haven't told him to stop though. The explosive boy's hands twitched with the barely suppressed urge to blow something up. You wanna go, hair for brains. Meanwhile, the other members of the class were questioning Melissa. Ashido gave her a grin. So, you know him pretty well if you're calling him by his first name, eh? Melissa blinked. Well, we're friends dash. Friends. Right. Sure. The pink girl didn't look convinced. Melissa sighed. Well, I met him briefly when I was helping to clean up Musutofo Beach as part of my strength training. He was using parts from the beach to make inventions. Uraraka whistled. So cleaning up a beach gave you big guns like that. Kind of a bummer it takes a long time to build muscle like that. Her friend just shrugged. Well, if you're following the workout plan Yagi came up with dash. Uraraka nodded. It's pretty tiring, but I'm managing. Kirishima just paused. Well, will Toru be okay? I mean, it's manly as hell that they want to help. But. Kaminari shuddered. It was like something out of a horror movie. Bakugo glared at them. Look, it's D. It's Izuku. He's a fucking lunatic, but he's made so much crazy. Shit, it's unreal. Bastard's smarter than most of you fuck munches. Shinsu quirked an eyebrow. Compared to Kaminari, that isn't hard. The rest of Class 1A laughed at that. Ida gave Shinsu a judging look for mocking a classmate, too, which Shinsu just shrugged. Kaminari whined, glaring at Shinsu. Come on, man. You know I'm better than you at English. Shinsu grinned, eyes lighting up. Yeah, that was quite shocking. Yeah, you see, oh, ha, ha. So funny I forgot how to laugh. Kaminari crossed his arms and sulked as they headed to their next class. When she found she hadn't been strapped to an operating table, Toru opened her eyes gingerly to see the pair of them snapping open a briefcase. She looked at the items in front of her. The gloves and boots were just like she'd asked for, with the addition of a tank top and tight shorts. Midoriya and Hatsume stood over her, encouraging grins. Go on, try our babies out. Still shaky from their menacing grins, she hesitantly picked up the tank top. So, how does this dash? Hatsume was back in her face. I'm glad you asked, hero. Midoriya picked up a glove. As we said, we didn't have any genetic material to make a proper DNA-infused suit, and that would have been invisible besides. He gave her a grin that seemed warmer. So instead, we've been working on a special metamaterial that uses titanium nano lenses to turn the material invisible on an electrical signal. Hatsume held up the glove. Tap the palm and it'll turn invisible. Hagakure looked between the pair of them. Sliding her hand in the glove, she tapped the palm. She gasped as she saw everything, gloves, boots, tank top and shorts, suddenly turn invisible. Midoriya frowned, shaking his head. Well, we only had so much material, so this is all we could make on short notice. And a change like this will need to be brought up with the agency that issued it. Though I think Power Loaders fast-tracked it. And the color is dash. Hagakure hugged him. Thank you. Thank you so much. As Midoriya flushed strawberry red, Hatsume came up to her next. So, future hero, if you're interested in more babies, I have a proposition for you. She whipped out a sheaf of paper. It's not much, but I have some prospective paperwork for an exclusive support contract. Just as long as you help me take out that despicable villain mastermind. Toru stared at her. I'm not sure if I'll need any more support equipment. You know? But. She hastily added, seeing Hatsume's crosshairs focus on her more closely. I could talk to other people. See if they need some stuff. Hatsume snapped away, grinning. Yes. Let me know if anybody needs babies in the future. I want to make so many more. Toru privately resolved not to talk to Hatsume unless absolutely necessary. Midoriya, at least, seemed more stable. Is there anything I should know dash? Midoriya gave her a cheerful smile. Well, we designed the fabric to be waterproof, so that's not a worry. Most of the suit is powered by really specialized batteries that can get charged by movement and body heat. Oh, and here's the final paperwork. From a side pocket, he pulled out a small sheaf of papers. You just need to sign this and give it to Eraserhead to let him know that you want to use these changes. Hagakure beamed at him. Taking the sheaf of paperwork off his hands, she got to signing everything. And later that day, when her classmates saw her new costume and its invisibility function, she felt on top of the world. Melissa in particular had been seriously impressed, the other girl asking a huge number of questions that made her head spin. Watching from the classroom, Aizawa got back to his paperwork. There was still some stuff to organize, but it wouldn't take long. They had a field trip to the USJ, after all. Rescue training wasn't going to happen by itself. Izuku grinned at the League of Supervillains, all ready. How has the search for the League of Villains been going? La Brava gave him a thumbs up. Well, I've been tracking people in the underground who would be likely to join up with them. She tapped at her laptop, bringing up a map. With a little hacking, I've been tracking them down to this building here. Inkblot's eyes widened. Hey, I've heard of that place. When they stared at her, she elaborated. Yeah, it used to be one of those hidden bar places. Got shut down a while ago. Izuku and his double grinned. Izuku pulled on the armor, setting the cape fluttering. Well, my fellow devious villains, we are going to deal with this band of fakers once and for all. Stitch hummed. So we're going to go in guns blazing. Mastermind shook his head. Not necessarily. They may listen to reason and take a different name. And they might want to join with the clearly superior villain group. But if they don't, we may have to fight. A feral grin crossed Inkblot's face. I hope they want to fight, she grinned, resting her arms on the haft of her mallet. Gentle Criminal fingered his cane. Golden Grin cracked his knuckles. Stitch adjusted his collar. La. Brava's face took on a determined expression. Twice and Bishijima, the newcomers, both adopted a determined attitude of their own. Little did we know that this meeting would be anything but simple. How did it end up? Well, that's for next time. Chapter end notes. All finito. So we're entering a faster paced bit now, mostly because MHA is very quickly paced. Seriously, they got attacked barely a week into school. It's unreal. So anyways, don't forget to comment, as I appreciate comments and criticism to make this the best not entirely serious fic possible. Next time, get ready for it, because we gotta come on and slam. Chapter notes. Issue 29. Come on and slam. See the end of the chapter 4. Notes. Izuku and his double glared at each other, sweat beading on their temple. This would be the deciding factor. One wrong move here would spell the other's fate. La Brava looked between them. All right, get ready. In unison, the teenage boys extended their fists. La Brava looked between the pair of them, then chopped the air between them. Rock, paper, scissors. They revealed their hands. The double had chosen to go for paper. However, Izuku cheered, raising his hand in the air. Got why? Double stared at Izuku, a despondent expression on his face. Oh, come on. He got a stuck-out tongue for his troubles. Save it, Double. We agreed that Janken was how we would settle disputes. Grumbling, the Double turned away. I wanted to wear the armor out, he grumbled, pouting. Inkblot patted him on the back gently. Mr. Compress looked over the gang of villains. So, we know what the plan is, right? Izuku looked away from sticking his tongue out at his Double to nod. Of course. I came up with it. After all, today was the day they would strike at this fake league of villains. They had the location, and a rough idea of how many people were there. With their latest upgrades to their gear, this was going to be a cinch. The Double waved his compatriots goodbye, preparing to go back home. This should all go smoothly. Let's hope that these ne'er-do-wells learn not to mess with the League of Supervillains. Thunder boomed once more, both Izukus reveling in the simple sound. Inkblot waved goodbye, grinning. No sweat. These dweebs won't know what hit them. Of course, I had no idea how wrong those words were, at that time. Still, Mastermind and the League of Supervillains were gearing up to deal with somebody using our name without our prior approval. We had worked hard on our brand, damn it. So for the day, it appeared that I went off to school, as normal. Meanwhile, I got prepared for dealing with the so-called League of Villains. Even thinking about it, it was just annoying dealing with something like that. There were a lot of things I hadn't known on that fateful day. At the time, I hadn't known that I was going to see my Aknemeses deal with my gear. I really, truly, wanted to be the villain who made them. I guess, technically I did. I suppose Shigaraki needs some credit. I wouldn't have been there if not for him. All that morning, Double was a bundle of nervous energy. How could he not be? He was only sitting around at school while his counterpart was having all of the fun getting ready to go to Camino. Still, he thought that he'd hidden it well. He was used to hiding this kind of stuff from everybody, especially his mother. Considering that she hadn't killed him for being a villain, he thought that he'd hidden it well. Across the workbench, Mai gave him her version of a concerned look. Come on, Izuku. The next piece of support Gi's gonna knock that guy out of the park. Laughing maniacally, she returned to the piece of robot they were working on. Double smiled. Good old Mai, looking out for him like that. I know, Mai. And don't worry, he grinned in a slightly menacing way. Across the table, Mayumi shivered. The next support gear we work on will be a blast. 12:50 p.m. Melissa bounced in place as they waited for the bus, full of nervous energy. Today was rescue training, a part of hero training that she had a particular interest in. After all, Dad hadn't regaled her with too many tales of defeating villains. He'd taken the time to talk about Uncle Might's less glamorous work. She'd listened admiringly to tales of All Might rescuing families with the same effort most people would put into putting on their pants. Izuku had confided to her and Uncle Might that his favorite clip of all Might was his debut in Japan, where he had saved over 1,000 people in a matter of hours. Uncle Might had walked with a spring in his step after hearing that. Melissa checked over her costume again. She'd specifically applied to make her costume herself. It wasn't that she didn't think that the support company would be able to do it, but because working on support gear was her passion. Melissa had politely asked the teachers if she could use her free period in the support studio to make improvements to her gear. She just must have had bad luck with finding Izuku in the labs. Melissa's costume looked like a mix between a typical jumpsuit and a suit of armor. The jumpsuit was tan and had plenty of freedom of movement, and most importantly had pockets on the legs and on the belt. Over the top she wore a dark red chestplate and spaulders, along with similarly colored bands covering her arms and legs, the improved full gauntlets and greaves to minimize damage to her limbs with one for all. For added protection, she had added a helmet with a spectacle guard. The lens is currently dark. Looking down at her costume, Melissa clenched her fist. This was why she was coming to this school, to learn how to be a hero and to become the next symbol of peace. Ida looked at his classmates with a look in his eyes reminiscent of a drill sergeant. Everybody, get on the bus in an orderly fashion according to your student IDs. Meanwhile, Mastermind glanced between the rest of the League of Supervillains. Everybody, ready. Across from him, Mr. Compress and Gentle Criminal bowed elegantly, their gear shining in the afternoon sun. Inkblot swung her mallet with a confident grin and a twinkle in her eye. Golden Grin cracked his knuckles. La Brava gave them a thumbs up, computer at the ready. With a cheerful thumbs up, Mastermind checked his equipment one last time. Let's go. Ida had been the most vocal about the proper seating placements in the bus. He even had a diagram and whistle. It had been a great disappointment to learn that the bus was configured with benches facing each other. Ida slumped in his seat. Darn, it was this kind of bus. Hitoshi snickered a bit. Well, at least we all got on in an orderly fashion, class rep. Don't worry about it. Rescue training. Hitoshi wanted to get right into it. Learning how to save people would be amazing. Certainly better than the last time he'd tried a rescue. I generally say what's on my mind, shield. Melissa and Hitoshi winced a bit. But today, I hope to give you a new perspective. In this class, you will learn how to utilize your quirks to save lives. The class stood up straighter as the space hero continued. Your quirks are not meant to hurt others. Bakugo quietly scoffed at that, and I hope that when this lesson is over you will understand that you are here to help people. They took a bow. That is all. Thank you. Melissa clapped with Ida. Learning how to save people from one of the best in the business. This was just an amazing opportunity. Under her skin, One for All hummed in agreement. Eraserhead sighed, glancing at his students. 13 had done an adequate job of motivating them. Great. First off dash. From the corner of his eye, he saw it. A black, swirling vortex just near the main fountain. A danger. Instinct bordering on a quirk screamed. Everybody, huddle up. His students hurried to comply, though they were initially confused. Wait, are those robots like in the entrance exam? Ida in particular looked at the situation with an appraising eye. Is this another logical ruse dash? Eraserhead snapped his goggles onto his face. Don't move. These are villains. The black vortex grew, bigger and bigger. Eraserhead tensed up, already fearing the worst. It could be the League of Supervillains. Their warp user is similar. But why would they dash? His thoughts were cut off by a group of villains popping through, a skinny man with hands clasping onto his body in some macabre display, followed by a hulking brute with vacant eyes and a man made of the same dark purple mist. More villains followed, each of them hurrying through, seeming to be nervous about something. The villain covered in hands brushed himself off, glaring at the misty figure. Kurogiri, what the fuck was that? The apparent Kurogiri shrugged. I honestly could not say. That they were able to find us is unsettling. Eraserhead was about to wonder what had their attention when he saw exactly what they were referring to. A familiar green and red figure strode through surrounded by green smoke, flanked by a black rabbit. Woman and a dandy of a man. Red spider-like robots skittered around them, leaping through to help secure a clear area. The villains around them backed up as more came through. There was La Brava, Mr. Warp and an unknown villain, a man of average height in black and gray spandex. Mina was the first to react. The League of Supervillains. Earlier, Shigaraki checked his watch. All right, let's get this raid on. He turned back to the rest of the fodder. Get ready for the fight of your life. After we're done with him, the symbol of peace will be no more. The fodder cheered, Shigaraki leering behind father. With this crew behind him, combined with Numu being a specific counterpick to the hated All Might, they had this fight in the bag. While they dealt with the students, really rubbing it into the symbol of peace how much of a failure he was. Numu would secure the kill. Kurogiri's warp gate quirk sprung up around them, the taciturn villain, preparing the precise coordinates to the USJ. Nothing could go wrong. Kaboom. Suddenly, the wall of the warehouse burst in. Shigaraki whipped around. What the hell? MWA ha ha ha. Around the hole, the villains there suddenly leapt backwards as a certain hated figure strode in, surrounded by green smoke and loud rock music. The rest of his cheating teammates followed, flanking their annoying-ass boss. Shigaraki's eyes narrowed. Well, this is just perfect. The warp gate suddenly activated behind them, pulling the League of Villains through. The last thing that Shigaraki saw as he fell backwards through the warp gate was the hated League of Supervillains, chasing after them. Now, Mastermind and the rest of the League of Supervillains strode out of the dense purple smoke. Outwardly, Mastermind was confident and collected. Inside, he was freaking out. Their external comms were dead, preventing them from reaching Stitch and vice versa, probably by some electrical villain here. About the only good thing about this was that the AI he'd built into these robots was working as intended. Still, the only thing they could do until communications had been re-established was to go ahead with it. He was well aware that it was a sunken cost and they should get out, but dealing with this fake League was important. Mastermind pointed dramatically at the villain covered in hands. Yes, indeed. It is I, the devious supervillain, Mastermind, and you're calling yourselves the League of Villains. You and your plan to rob this place aren't affiliated with us. He stared at the building and the group at the top of the stairs. The cameras in his helmet zoomed in, enhancing what he saw. That was Kakin. And Melissa. What? The hand villain glared at him with incredible venom. You, he spat. Mastermind barely tore his gaze away to point at himself. Me. Idly he held his other hand near his freeze ray as the rest of the League got ready. Around them, the various thugs and villains had mostly recovered from their shock. The hand villain kept glaring at him. Yeah, you're the guy who jacked my guild name. You bastard. Well, that was just unfair. Mastermind glared right back at him. Actually, I used it first, so it's my name. And you're besmirching my brand, gathering up all of these thugs. The misty figure leaned over to the skinny man. Shigaraki, it may be for the best if we try again. Some other time. Fighting a battle on two fronts would be . Shigaraki waved his hand. No. This is perfect. Sure, All Might hasn't spawned, but that's okay. Maybe a few dead kids will change his mind. Wait. What? Mastermind stared at Shigaraki. He had been ready to give this guy a chance, but this? The rest of the League was similarly disturbed. Gentle Criminal similarly stared at the younger man. You're going to kill these students. Shigaraki tilted his head. Yay. All Might's not here. Might as well get something out of this. Inkblot's grip on her mallet shifted. Gentle Criminal gripped his walking stick with a furious scowl on his face. It seems you have a very different idea about what is and is not appropriate behavior. Hitoshi's eyes were wide. Apparently they were witnessing a villain civil war in front of them. Todoroki simply stared out at the group. This League of Villains attacked us when we were away from the main campus, and they chose a time when there weren't many people around. His gaze hardened. Apart from the sudden intrusion, this is a very well-organized sneak attack. What's their objective? Meanwhile, Mastermind and the League of Supervillains stared at Shigaraki. The lead villain stepped forwards. I have to say, Shigaraki, if you want to ape us, you're doing a terrible job of it. For his part, the hand-covered villain stared at him with a confused tilt to his head. What? Mastermind shrugged. Yeah, I mean, sure, robbing the place would be appropriate, but killing kids, that's just wrong. I concur. You are certainly no gentleman. The whole situation felt unreal. Hitoshi wanted to run, but he just couldn't take his eyes off the scene. Below, it was an utter train wreck from start to finish. Even Aizawa was watching, probably more for an opening and to appraise it more than fascination. For his part, the hand-covered villain just stared at Mastermind. "You aren't dangerous at all," he rasped. Mastermind stopped. "What?" Shigaraki sneered at the League of Supervillains. "You heard me. In this world, it's kill or be killed. Some snot-nosed punk like you that thinks this is some sort of comic book world. Please." His voice took on a mocking lilt. "You think this is all some silly story? There is no Easter Bunny. There is no Tooth Fairy, and there is no Queen of England." Inkblot growled at him, the rest of the League of Supervillains readying their weapons. The villains around them looked between each other, then back to the flight of stairs. One of them, a large, rocky man with 4 arms, raised a hand. "So, we're killing them and the kids, right?" At that statement, Eraserhead snapped his head around. 13. Get ready to evacuate the students. The sensors haven't gone off yet. They must have somebody jamming them. He turned to Kaminari, his tone softening very slightly. "Kaminari, try to use your quirk to signal for help." As Kaminari stammered out an affirmation, Hitoshi looked at his teacher. He started to connect the dots and a dark feeling of anxiety welled up in his stomach. "Wait, you can't mean to fight them all at once, sensei." Eraserhead, Aizawa-sensei, simply adjusted his capture weapon. "Get ready for anything," he muttered to the rest of the class. Hitoshi tried to reach out to their teacher. "But, Eraserhead, your specialty is ambush attacks. You won't be able to erase dash. Word of advice, class, no hero is a one-trick pony." And with that, Eraserhead was flying down at the villains. A couple of them tried to use their quirks on him with cocky grins, only to fail. While they stood around, gawking at their hands in surprise, Eraserhead went on the offensive. A few raps of his capture weapon and a twist and 3 villains were knocked out. The other villains looked between themselves, then charged at the pro with a roar. Shigaraki sighed. "Hard to tell whose quirk is getting erased. Real life needs a better UI. Kurogiri, make sure that the brats don't call aggro." The misty villain nodded, slipping away before the others could react. Portals opened as he went, the villains getting into position. Mastermind seemed to snap to a more serious mode. "Everybody, run. Interference." Inkblot watched with a worried look. Gentle Criminal and La Brava nodded, then tore off into a portal, following a group of villains. Mr. Warp and Golden Grin leapt through different ones. A large, rocky man with 4 arms leered down at Mastermind. "I don't see what the big deal with this guy is. Those heroes just don't know that to deal with a pest like you dash." He raised a mighty fist. "Overhead. You gotta stomp them out." Mastermind override, code 10 danger zone. After Eraserhead, I was aware that, more than ever, I needed to step up my game. If a hero in the top 10 went after me, then I would be in serious trouble, as would my crew. So I decided to make my armor stronger. Much, much stronger. The armor had been designed to put less strain on my body than might ordinarily be expected. The breastplate had borrowed its design from a piece of technology one had stolen from my first job. Designed to take 2 hits from All Might before breaking. The principle had been applied to most of the rest of my armor. I needed to be decently strong to wear my suit in the first place, but it was designed to enhance my strength slightly, even so, enough to make sure that my punches hurt more or that I could run faster. I simply made a few modifications. Using specialized carbon fibers, industrial strength pistons, and chemicals, I created a greatly improved suit that would multiply strength, speed, and agility by a wide margin. Initial tests confirmed that I made it a bit strong. Certainly too strong to use against normal heroes. That wouldn't do, would it? I designed it to work with the rudimentary AI I had built into my helmet. If it picked up a member of the top 10 heroes, then it would shunt in automatically. But for circumstances like this, killing All Might, not going to happen, and this amazing mode, I called it. Shigaraki grinned as the thug swung his fist down. Oh, seeing Mastermind splatter would be too rich dash. Mastermind vanished. At least, that's what it looked like to Shigaraki. What dash? The brute blinked, turning around to see Mastermind standing behind him. Looking closely, Shigaraki could see that Mastermind's appearance had changed. Green light shone on the seams of his armor, leading from the middle of his chest and threading through his gauntlets and boots. His cape fluttered wildly in an imaginary wind. Mastermind, full cowl. Shigaraki could only say one thing. Phase 2 already. We haven't even damaged you yet. The thug laughed. So he turned on some LCDs in his armor. Like that'll dash. Mastermind lashed out with a punch. K-ya crack. The thug howled as his arm snapped like a twig. Mastermind then followed with a kick that sent a man about 3 times his size skidding through the dirt. He turned to Shigaraki, Inkblot watching, with a huge grin on her face. Well, Shigaraki, you said I wasn't dangerous, right? Green lightning sparked around him. Let's get dangerous. Chapter end notes. This one was fun. I actually rewrote this substantially. So, we have had people meeting. And, hopefully, a suitably dramatic finisher. Action, drama, romance, and bloodshed. All the elements of a good story. Chapter notes. Issue 30. Welcome to the jam. See the end of the chapter 4. Notes. Shinsu stared at the fight below, joined by most of the class. Even though he'd seen Mastermind in the flesh, a small part of him had always thought that the villain was harmless. The guy treated his villainy as if he was some sort of comedian, just playing a role. Mastermind had apparently had enough of playing around, given the unconscious thug with a broken arm. The villains around him gave him a wide berth, the hand-covered villain furious given his clenching fists. Then his training kicked in. Hurriedly he ran with the rest of his classmates, trying to get out Dash. The Dak, misty figure from below rose up to meet them. Well, that was cutting it a bit fine. Terribly. Sorry, hero students, but I cannot allow any of you to leave. Hitoshi pulled out his quarterstaff, teeth grit. Oh, great. I bet you're a real gas at parties, Mr. Mist. Arius. Come on, come on. Unfortunately, the villain simply stared at him before dismissing the barb. Greetings, young heroes. You may call me Kurogiri. As you may have guessed, we are the League of Villains, and certainly not associated with that other group. We came here today to end the life of All Might, the symbol of peace. Behind him, Melissa gasped in horror. The rest of the class had similar reactions. Kill All Might. That couldn't happen, right? The misty figure in front of them paused. Based on the schedule, he should be here. And yet he isn't. Maybe he changed his schedule. But it doesn't matter. Dark purple mist rose around them. My role is still unchanged Dash. Kaboom. He was cut off by Kirishima and Bakugo deciding to take the initiative. The former with a fist to the face, and the latter with an explosion. Eat shit, mist fucker. Kirishima glared the villain down, Quirk turning his hands into craggy knives. Didn't think we'd fight back, did ya? In front of them, the mist villain reformed. A foggy hand brushed a speck of dust off his shoulder. Well, that was close. You truly are the best of your year. Unfortunately, it has not changed anything. More mist rose up around them. Hitoshi tried, once more, to make it to the door Dash. The mist overtook him, and he felt himself fall, the villain's words echoing through the mist. I am afraid that you shall be scattered. Please, try not to die while you are inside my gate. It makes such a mess. Twisting through the air, Hitoshi could just make out the water below, the flood zone, maybe? He hit the water with a splash, and as he tried to reach the surface, he saw a shark-like villain leering at him. He tried to assume a stance as the villain dashed forwards. Nothing personal, kid. Just got a dash. A green missile hit the side of the villain's head. Mastermind cracked his knuckles, glaring at the villains around him. The expressions on their faces ranged from scared to seriously regretting their life choices. Eraserhead was similarly shocked, even, as he kicked a villain in the stomach. The robots he'd brought had gone dormant, waiting for the right opportunity to deploy them. Mastermind tapped a button on his gauntlet. The villains around him tensed, waiting for whatever trick he had up his sleeve. A screeching guitar started. The villains around him stared, confused as the opening notes of I Don't Wanna Stop started. Well, you want to use our name, then take it. He fired his freeze ray, the villains around him trying to run away, laughing maniacally. Mastermind started to really teach the villains around him a serious lesson. Izuku grinned, patting the side of his most recent invention. And that's why I'm having Mr. Compress carry it for me. I'm keeping this as a last resort. Inkblot grinned. We are officially the coolest villain group in the goddamn world. Double and Izuku grinned at that statement. The double then pulled out a tiny panel, covered in what looked like fine mesh. Oh, you think that's cool? Behold. He pressed it. A blast of trumpets and a rhythmic drumbeat followed, sounding through the entire room. Izuku gasped as bad. Played through the house. A sound system. How did I miss this? He whipped around. Double. We need to modify the armor right away. I knew you'd see its brilliance. Let's get right to it. La brava everybody. You can hear me, right? He murmured. There was a crackle of static, then the shorter villain's voice came through. Why yeah. The rest of the villains followed, starting with Golden Grin. Everything's on fire. I'm fine though. I appear to be in a wrecked building of some sort, another training area. Hopefully we can dash a loud explosion cut Mr. Compress off. Everything's dark and drab here. What a nice day to fuck shit up. La Brava paused. I still can't reach Stitch Dash. Mastermind hummed. That's not the best news, but at least we can stay in touch in the USJ. Listen, I've turned on full cowl, so I should be fine. Do what you can to thwart these villains dragging our name through the mud. You got it. Thus reassured his team was okay, Mastermind turned around. Sorry, but we don't condone hurting children. We're divas, nefarious supervillains, not jerks. A wolf-like villain snarled at Mastermind. Why, you dash. BABAM. Mastermind spun, landing a brutal kick on the villain's side. The toes of his boots sprang out with the motion, doubling the impact and causing the villain to go flying. Mastermind posed in front of them. MWA ha ha ha. You think you can take the life of my future arch-nemesis so easily? Eraserhead paused while watching Mastermind before slamming another villain into the ground. His capture tape writhed through the air as if it was alive, the pro executing a series of devastating combos. Around the USJ, the League of Villains was experiencing a similar problem, that the clownish villains they'd mocked for not being willing to kill were unexpectedly dangerous. Melissa and Shinsu sucked in deep breaths as Tsuyu carefully climbed up the side of the ship, keeping a wary eye on the aquatic villains surrounding them. Thanks, Asui, Shinsu managed to gasp. She'd come through before the purple-haired boy. It had been a stroke of luck that she'd managed to recover before a villain had managed to get to her. After making it to the surface, she'd made her way over to the boat and clambered up before they could get there. The frog girl shook her head. Call me Tsuyu, Kiro, but we are definitely in serious trouble. Huh. Gaze traveled slightly to the prow of the ship, starting with these two. Melissa paused as she checked the rest of her support gear. Who dash? She gasped as she saw the problem. Sitting right on the prow, keeping a similar eye on the assailants. Below them was the villainous duo La Brava and Gentle Criminal. What are you doing here? Gentle Criminal wrung out the long tail of his coat. We leapt through to stop this league of villains from doing too much damage. Really, they are quite uncouth, one of those miscreants. Underwater nearly bit me in half. But we managed to escape and inflict a bit of damage on the way. La Brava clung to the side of the taller man. Shinsu twitched when he saw her. Looking at the villains in the water, Melissa could pick out a couple that looked battle-damaged. Gentle Criminal was pretty dangerous for such a gentlemanly figure. We certainly did, La Brava. He had a refined chuckle. The senior villain then turned to the group. Face serious. In light of everything that is happening right now, we are not your enemy. La Brava nodded. We only wanted to get them to not use a name so similar to ours. But this is just wrong. We truly had no idea they wanted to attack you.A, Gentle Criminal confirmed. I dislike using violence to resolve a conflict in general, but you don't kill children. It's just not done. Melissa watched them closely. She'd seen their reactions to Shigaraki's statement about killing the hero students, and she remembered Uncle Might describing Mastermind. For whatever reason, his instincts told him that Mastermind was not a dangerous man. We'll work together then, until we're out of danger. That is more than generous, Gentle politely bowed. Now, we have to deal with these aquatic ruffians. Melissa nodded. Tapping the side of her helmet, the lenses lit up, displaying a variety of heat signatures around her. I would say there are about 20 villains here. Shinsu tapped his chin. I don't think they know our quirks. They wouldn't have warped Tsuyu here. Otherwise. He stared out at the group. It explains why they are being cautious. They don't know what we can and cannot do. La Brava looked closely at him, then back to Gentle. So, you have a frog quirk, and you have a brainwashing quirk. Shinsu looked away at that. Then she turned to Melissa. So, what's your quirk then? Melissa looked down at her gauntlet. I have a strength-boosting quirk. It's really powerful, but I don't have fine control over it and can only do one limb at a time. Not the complete truth, but close. Enough. Gentle criminal bowed politely. You know that my quirk is elasticity. I can bestow the properties of rubber onto any non-living thing I touch. La Brava's quirk is, well, a one-time use deal and would only work on me. Shinsu sighed. All right. So with your quirks, we should be able to figure out a plan of action dash. Man, I'm tired of waiting. Toom. Shinsu sighed as the ship got cleaved in half. Or the ship gets destroyed and we improvise. One of the villains leered below. Hell, yeah. Gonna get that tiny woman. Gentle criminal's face turned serious. All right. So, young students, I will assist in getting us out of here. He patted the deck, a slight wobble on its surface indicating what he'd done. He then quickly scooped La Bravo into his arms, the short woman blushing at the close contact. Melissa looked over at Shinsu. Would you? Quickly she ran to the front of the boat, grinning when she saw the generator was working properly. All it would need were a few wires. Shinsu grinned at the host of aquatic villains, taking a deep breath. He clicked the artificial vocal cords so that they would amplify his voice. Who lives in a pineapple under the sea? He hollered in a pirate voice. Behind him, the villains stared at him incredulously. Melissa honestly couldn't blame them. Even knowing what Shinsu's quirk was, she didn't think any of them would respond. About a quarter of them yelled, SpongeBob SquarePants. Their comrades just looked at them with a confused look in their eyes. Shinsu staggered after they responded, managing to catch himself. Got them, he ground out. Melissa gave him a nod. Order them to pen the other villains in. She adjusted her bindings. Grimacing, he repeated the order, and the flooded area below them was quickly turned into a chaotic madhouse as villains grabbed their comrades, herding them into one area. Shinsu shot a pained look at Gentle, before holding on to the older man with a grim expression. Melissa looked around. If it was a working replica, there. She tore into the wall like it was made of cardboard, pulling out several wires. Gentle criminal watched warily as she quickly hauled them over to the generator. La Brava's eyes widened. That's. Melissa quickly hooked them up, then glanced over at the other girl. Tsuyu. The frog-like girl nodded. That's a rather nasty trick, Kiro. She hopped over to the generator, readying to pull the switch. Will they dash? Melissa nodded. Then she threw the connected wires into the middle of the group of villains, wincing at the collective scream as they got hit with electricity. After a couple of seconds, she hauled the wires back. In the middle of the water, the villains were floating, either knocked out or barely conscious. Feeling one for all spark in her legs, she pushed off from the boat's elastified surface, making a mighty leap back to the shore with Tsuyu and Gentle Criminal. From where they had landed near the edge of the flood zone, Gentle Criminal swallowed, staring at the shocked villains with wide eyes. I am so glad we were not fighting you, he muttered. Next to him, Shinsu chuckled, only to groan and clutch his head. La Brava reluctantly removed herself from Gentle Criminal's grasp, holding her hands out carefully. She typed away in the air, brow furrowed, before she swiped a hand through the space with a frustrated sigh. Melissa looked over to La Brava, knowing what the answer would be but trying to find some hope in the situation. Anything. La Brava shook her head. Outside comms are still down. It seems that the rest of the league is busy. They both winced at the sudden loud explosion that came from her headset. La Brava sighed. At least we had an easy time of it. Bakugo glared around the collapsed buildings. There it was again. Oi, Shitty Hair. We're being watched. Shitty Hair jogged behind him. Really? I mean, we're currently being dash. A villain lunged at him. The other teenager lashing out with a rock-hard fist to the jaw. Attacked by villains right now. Bakugo shook his head. Not like that. Somebody else is fighting the rest of these guys. They turned a corner, seeing a gaggle of villains trying to extract themselves from a net. See? Shitty Hair hummed, considering. Yeah, looks like it. Maybe they are turning on each other. Bakugo looked around, trying to find something out of place. It's got to be that purple smoke. Bastard, he growled. Top Hat, or whatever his name was. As another villain ate an explosion, he started to think about it. Sure, the stupid goddamn league of supervillains wanted to deal with this other league. That made sense. But why did they leap through The other warp uses stuff. They had a warper already. They rounded a corner, only to stop when they saw an extremely unusual sight. Shitty hair blinked. That's new. A blob of light green foam greeted them, the stuff looking like a pile of melted rubber. Inside, the groaning forms of various villains poked out, trying and failing to extract themselves from the stuff. Bakugo glared at them. That was a new trick, all right. Did the League of Super Idiots have some quirk at their base that could make blobs? Mr. Compress watched as Izuku and his double carefully filled a baseball-sized sphere with a bright green liquid. So, what exactly is this? Mastermind turned around. Simplicity itself, Mr. Compress. I've been thinking about incorporating something like this into my gear for some time. He held up the sphere, holding it reverently. Behold, the compression foam grenade. The chemical in here has a fascinating reaction with air. It expands rapidly, forming a nearly impenetrable foam. The double grinned. I worked hard on this formula. It's porous enough to breathe through, resistant to extreme temperatures, and to top it all off, it's seriously rubbery. You would need to have an incredible strength quirk to tear out of it. Mr. Compress blinked. Would you mind if I used some? Mastermind and his double looked between themselves. Then Mastermind gave a thumbs up. No problem. We're also going to be working on a sprayable version for our own suit. And if one of us gets caught, I made this. Mr. Compress blinked as Double held up a vial of red-colored liquid. This stuff melts through the foam like anything. It's a mild skin irritant though, so you'll want to wash it off as soon as possible. From his vantage point, Mr. Compress whistled as he saw the results. He had been right to keep his distance from the hero students. One look at the spiky-haired blonde one and his talk of killing as many villains as he could had led to the decision to keep an eye on them from afar. The loud explosions had caused several villains to plan an ambush on the teenagers. Mr. Compress had seen fit to deal with them. 2 of the containment foam grenades and most of the villains were now stuck in a blob of greenish, rubbery foam. The villains struggled, trying to claw free. What is this shit? Get it off. Get it off. What's poking me in the back? Oh, gross. Get the fuck off me. The hero students looked at the sight before them before the red-haired one shook his head and left. The spiky-haired blonde one paused, looking around, before ultimately tearing off to crush a nearby villain. Seeing them leave for the center of the USJ, Mr. Compress took a deep bow then left. He had to get back to where Mastermind was. He had a few bits and pieces that the main boss wanted to try. In the downpour zone, Kuda and Tokoyami looked between themselves. In front of them, the black and gray villain gave them a cheery thumbs up. Names twice. Pleased to be working with you. I hate you both. Tokoyami shook his head. What a mad banquet of darkness, he muttered. Kuda looked between the pair of them. Quietly, he signed to Tokoyami. Maybe we should leave the crazy villain here. Next to him, Dark Shadow grinned, empowered by the dark conditions. It hulked over the group, gripping a bruised villain in its claws. Come on, Toko. He'll be great. Tokoyami hummed. We really should. Dark Shadow pouted. He resolutely ignored his quirk. Twice pouted. Well, whatever. I'll make my own way. Don't leave me. I can't handle it. He skipped off, another villain trying to get in close. POW. And the heroes in training were left stunned as the unassuming Twice delivered a hit that dropped the other man like he'd been hit with a sledgehammer. Twice seemed to smile, raising his arms in the air. Yeah, I'm the greatest. No, you're not. You're hot shit. Twice left, arguing with himself, insisting that he was the ruler of everything. A blob of brown sludge formed in his other hand, transforming into a grenade of some kind. A villain tried to jump the talkative Twice, but he chucked the grenade at them. Whoa! They flinched at the loud bang and burst of light, Dark Shadow shrinking backwards. Kumbaya! It muttered. Twice seemed to be unaffected, the remains of the flashbang dissolving into a dark, muddy substance. Blinking the stars from their eyes, Tokoyami and Kuda looked between themselves. Then Tokoyami shook his head, getting ready to follow in the same direction as Twice. The sooner they got out of here, the sooner they could leave this facility. A mad banquet of darkness indeed. Mastermind turned to Jin. Well, Jin, I've made something for self-defense. He pulled out a pair of gauntlets and boots, holding them out. Jin held them in his hands as Mastermind continued. I based the design on the stuff I've hidden in my armor. Basically, it makes your hits way more intense. It doubles the kinetic impact of your strikes, meaning it can fake a weak enhancement quirk. Or you could use them as explicit gadgets and only double one of the other useful items we've made. The double he'd made of his boss said, I can modify your mask to reduce loud noises and bright lights and show you how to make some flashbangs. Oh, and laser beams. Mastermind gave Jin a wide smile. Whatever your choice, Bubaigawara, I'll be there to help you. Jin sniffed. This is one of the nicest things anybody's done for me. He snapped back up. I won't let you guys down. Leave it to me. In the mountainous area, Inkblut paused, putting down the villain she'd been using to hit other villains. Around her in a circle lay the groaning bodies of several unfortunates who'd tried to fight. Glaring at her were two teenage girls, one with headset jacks for earlobes and a jacket, the other in a very revealing costume and a ponytail. A blonde teenage boy stared at the leering villains, surrounding them with a fearful expression. She idly kicked a villain in the crotch while keeping an eye on the teens. Then she laughed. Listen up, pipsqueaks. I ain't gonna fight you unless you try it. The taller girl paused. I've heard of your exploits. You really aren't dash. A villain tried to grab the ponytail girl, causing her to spin and pull a quarterstaff from her arm in the same motion. Inkblut's jaw dropped. Whoa, wait, what? The hero in training's leg glowed, a baseball bat grip protruding. Jiru. Right. Inkblut smirked. Didn't think I'd see a quirk like mine here. She poured a vial of ink down her throat, reaching behind her back. A splurt of colored light later, and she smirked as she felt the design coalesce. Right. The villains charged as one, only to backpedal furiously when she pulled out a black sphere adorned with a skull and crossbones, the fuse fizzing. She chucked it at them, grinning. Kaboom. She turned back to the kids as the villains were knocked through the air from the force of the explosion. How'd YA like that? These kids are pretty entertaining, she mused as she watched the earjack girl stab a man with her earlobe, causing him to fall over screaming. Electric Boy got kicked into another villain and tase him, causing him to declare that he was actually pretty freaking strong, and gave the girls a cocky grin. At least she didn't have to worry about them. Mastermind, on the other hand. Thinking about Mastermind, Izuku, made her nervous. Despite his many gadgets and the power he'd demonstrated with full cowl, their boss was the same age as these heroes. It cut a bit closer than she would like to admit, seeing how willing this Shigaraki was to kill teenagers. She masked all those feelings with a grin. So, who wants to count how many villains they knock out? Currently I'm on. She counted the prone villains. About 10. Electric Kid whined at that. What? Come on, that's not fair. Supervillain, remember. Ojiro snuck around a corner, keeping an eye on the villains gathering there. He'd barely managed to get away from them when he'd been warped to the Inferno Zone. They'd briefly wondered if he was one of them, apparently not recognizing that he was a student. The villains here looked like they either had fire quirks, or quirks that meant they weren't as affected by the heat. A group of villains ran past, chasing a familiar gold-outfitted villain. Oh god. He managed to turn back, firing a blast of golden light from his mouth that knocked a couple of them away. Panting, Golden Grin wiped some sweat off his brow. Why are there so many of these assholes? Here. He looked around, then his eyes widened. Hey, kid. Ojiro fell into a combat stance as the villain approached, hands held high. Look, I don't want to fight. You're with the class, right? And I should trust you, why? Golden Grin shrugged. Fair enough. His eyes widened. Look out. An ordinary person might have asked for clarification, or turned around to gawk at whatever it was. Ojiro, however, was a heroic student in the most exclusive class in Japan. So rather than do either of those things, he instead delivered a solid kick to the solar plexus of a hulking Elizard mutation villain, sneaking up on him. As the villain crumpled up, he turned back to Golden Grin. Getting out of here. Golden Grin fired a blast of golden light at another approaching villain. Sure. I hate this place, I'm all sticky. From his hiding place, Amr paused when he saw a golden laser beam shoot through the air. For a brief moment, his self-hatred about causing this whole horrible situation went away. He shook his head. Like the last time he'd seen Golden Grin on the internet, a strange wave of déjà vu washed over him. He couldn't say for sure, but he had definitely seen this blast before. Shigaraki watched Mastermind and Eraserhead fighting the minions he'd brought with naked hatred. On his face, not only were they working together and not taking each other on, the thugs he'd rounded up weren't doing anything. Eraserhead was bad enough by himself, dealing with thugs like it was going out of style, delivering powerful kicks and punches in conjunction with that rare item. Sure, this wasn't what he was spec'd for, but he still tore through them. And Mastermind, truth be told, Shigaraki had thought that one of these 2-bit thugs would actually be able to hurt or kill the bastard. Every villain they'd found and asked about him had been of a similar opinion. The guy was a loser. The guy was successful, but he was just so embarrassing. What people wanted was fame, not to be some goddamn clown. Apparently Mastermind was a bullshit cheater. He blitzed around the area, most villains barely able to react before getting a blow to the stomach or legs that sent them flying. A group of them tried to dash at Eraserhead, only for the villain to pull out some baseball-sized sphere and chuck it at them. Shigaraki tore the skin on his neck when he saw the resulting green foam swallow them up before Mastermind fired a blast of freezing light at the other villains. Fucking tinkers. He scratched at his neck, watching, waiting for an opportunity. Sure, the pair of them were less tired individually, but there would be a weakness soon enough. A dual boss was annoying enough, but it was just a matter of finding. Eraserhead's hair flopped down after he executed a combo. Shigaraki's eyes widened. There it was. Mastermind spun, delivering a powerful kick to the midsection of another villain. There seemed to be no end to these thugs. Apparently most of the criminal population of Japan had been recruited by this guy. Still, he had to keep his spirits up. He stomped on the midriff of a downed villain, posing dramatically as thunder roared around him. MWA ha ha ha. Fools. You think such feeble efforts will do anything. The villains around him tensed up, but Shigaraki didn't react to the jab. Instead, 23 seconds, the villain hissed. Mastermind turned back to Eraserhead. Suddenly, Shigaraki was on the hero. The thing about boss-type enemies is, they've always got to tell, don't they? Eraserhead glared at Shigaraki. The white-haired villain continued mumbling. See, your hair keeps flopping down over your eyes every time you've done a combo. The gap between your hair coming up and your moves, it's increasing. Mastermind tried to get to Shigaraki, but the villain simply pointed at him. Numu, fight him. The massive, blue-black figure shot in front of Mastermind, its eyes not showing malice or joy but a simple blankness. Even with the suit enhancing his speed, Izuku barely had time to dodge the blow. Numu hounding his steps. Eraserhead grunted in pain. Mastermind's heart leapt into his mouth when he saw the Erasure heroes. Elbow disintegrating. He tried to get to Shigaraki even as Eraserhead knocked him away, but Numu's fist filled his vision. He barely ducked under the blow, trying to find an opening. The scanner in his helmet was going haywire just looking at Numu. Something about Numu's quirk was overloading it, almost as if it was trying to scan more than one quirk. Numu hurt Eraserhead. Numu paused in its assault. Mastermind saw a blur of movement. Izuku found his legs moving on their own. For Hitoshi, a couple of things happened very quickly after that. First, he saw the hulking brute Numu dash over to his teacher, moving at speeds that nothing that big should reach. He saw, for the second time, Mastermind do something completely irrational and zip at similar speeds to get in front of Eraserhead. The hero, in turn, tried to wrap the creature's arm in his capture weapon and tugged on it. He might as well have done nothing. Numu's punch stopped an inch from Mastermind's face. Then, it withdrew, darting to a different angle to try and get Eraserhead. Mastermind briefly paused, then tried to get in its way again. Shigaraki groaned. Ua. Numu, just throw him out of the way. What? Hitoshi shook his head, trying to think through the pounding headache. Next to him, Tsuyu and Melissa watched the fight, watching to see if there was something they could do. Gentle Criminal and La Brava stood still for a moment, then Gentle shook his head. I can't stand by and do nothing, he muttered. Leaping out of the water, he braced against the ground. Gently. Rebound. He shot off towards the fight, La Brava trying to hold him back. Gentle. I dash. Save it for later. Hitoshi kept a close eye on La Brava as she reluctantly closed her mouth. He hadn't forgotten that. She'd beaten him up, but right now there was more important stuff happening. As he watched Numu try to throw Mastermind away only to get a face full of pepper spray, a thought struck him. About Numu's blank, wall-eyed expression, its docile nature, how it never moved without Shigaraki calling an order. He started to fiddle with the artificial vocal cords, trying to get them into the right position. Melissa looked over at him. Are you trying to brainwash Numu? Tsuyu watched alongside him with a worried expression. I don't think you should. You don't look okay. Hitoshi shook his head. I wonder. I mean, it can't be this easy. Numu flailed around, in serious pain from the pepper spray. Shigaraki shook his head. For fuck's sake. Numu, wash your eyes in the water then break the bastard's arm. A strand of capture tape wound around Numu's arm, but it tore the carbon fibers as if they were toilet paper. 1 second it was there, the next it was in the water, and then it was torpedoing towards Eraserhead dash. Hitoshi's hands shook as he slotted the vocal cords into position. It couldn't really be this easy, could it? Shigaraki grinned as he watched Numu finally get its head in the game. It threw Mastermind into the air, the shorter man desperately trying to get in the way again. Like he was a fucking hero or something. Gentle whatever jumped to try and catch his boss, then bounced off the air to try and intercept. A bit too late. Numu had already engaged with Eraserhead. The pro-hero screamed as Numu grabbed his arm and snapped it between 2 banana-thick fingers. Gentle and Mastermind froze in horror watching it. Perfect. Numu slammed Eraserhead on the ground, knocking the wind out of the hero. Shigaraki grinned as he watched Numu raise it fist, Mastermind dashing to grab it. Numu, let him go. Shigaraki stopped as he saw Numu's grip slacken, letting Eraserhead back up. What the hell was that? I didn't dash. He turned to look at the kids in the water. One of them, the purple-haired one, blinked, apparently, checking the weird thing around his face. It's that easy, he said in Shigaraki's voice. Shigaraki glared at him. Oh, you really think you're funny, don't you? The teenager gave him a deadpan stare. Hey Numu, punch Shigaraki. Numu charged at Shigaraki, fist raised high, but when it came close to Shigaraki the blow stopped an inch away. Shigaraki chuckled at the kid, who stared at him with a horrified look on his face. Please. Numu was designed to protect me as well as kill All Might. Now, within a blink of an eye, Shigaraki was on top of the brat. He tore at the brat's mask, ready to disintegrate it dash. Nothing happened. In spite of everything, Shigaraki just laughed. Man, you're pretty pogus, Eraserhead. The hero in question glared, having managed to prop himself up on his one good arm. Ripping the mask away from the kid's face, he turned around to glare at the hero. Numu. Numu responded this time, at least. He zoomed over to the Erasure hero, ready to attack. And then the blonde girl in the armor charged at him. Get away from him. He rolled his eyes. Another wannabe hero. Numu. The girl pulled back her fist and swung forwards. Smash. Wham. Numu caught the punch with a blank grin. As she looked down at her fist, Shigaraki sighed. Fan of the symbol of peace, right? Doing a smash like that. Well, too bad Numu's been bioengineered to be the perfect All Might killer. Mastermind came in with a kick, one which Numu easily intercepted. Mastermind gasped as Numu soaked the hit, natural Regan removing any damage that could have gotten through Numu's shock. Absorption quirk. Shigaraki sucked in a breath. This was doable. Sure, it wasn't perfect, but it was manageable. Numu could handle anything the League of Stupid Villains and these hero brats could do. And with Kurogiri on crowd control, there was no way that these brats could get any more heroes here. Kurogiri came hurtling out of the sky, bouncing along the ground a few times. It was just one thing after the other, wasn't it? Melissa managed to tug her hand out of the monster's grip while it was distracted. Her head swam. She knew she'd unleashed a full-strength smash on Numu, yet he hadn't even budged. What kind of quirk? Her eyes widened. Given its impossible strength, he could have multiple quirks, a strength quirk. Definitely an impact-related one if her hit hadn't worked. And Shigaraki had said that Numu was engineered to be a killer. It didn't look good. On the ground, Kurogiri groaned as he picked himself back up. His yellow eyes focused on Shinsu. Unsteadily. When did you get all purple, Shouter? Shigaraki gripped the warper by the collar, shaking him. Kurogiri. What the fuck happened? The warp villain shook himself. And my apologies, the students teamed up to stop me. One of them had some sort of enhancement quirk. He paused, before holding his head. I must apologize. One of the students was able to escape dash. Shigaraki stepped back. You let one of them leave. If you weren't our Hearthstone, I'd kill you right now, he rasped. Kurogiri sighed. It may be best if we left. From what I have seen, the League of Supervillains have been causing chaos and mayhem for our forces. Shigaraki scratched at his neck. Well, I guess this is GG then. Any of the filth that got beaten should be left behind, but we'll take the rest back with us. We can't handle dozens of pros. Melissa's breath caught. Would they just leave like that? Out of the corner of her eye, she could see Tsuyu and Shinsu thinking similar thoughts, wanting to believe the villains would just back off. But Shigaraki turned back to Tsuyu and Shinsu, raising a hand. However, I feel we should leave a few dead kids to piss All Might off dash. Kabam! Shigaraki turned around. Melissa followed his gaze and gasped. Standing at the gates of the USJ was Uncle Might. She zoomed in on his face and gasped. Uncle Might wasn't smiling. She hadn't seen that kind of expression on his face except when talking about All for One. He spoke through gritted teeth, his voice echoing through the USJ. Never fear, students. Mastermind and Gentle Criminal pulled themselves up, the sheer fear on Gentle Criminal's face, mirrored by Mastermind's stance. Eraserhead looked up at the stairs with an expression of awe and relief she had never thought she would see on him. I am here. Chapter end notes. This one was fun. I rewrote some stuff, made the scenes more entertaining. So, All Might is on the scene. What will happen next? Find out in Mostly Harmless. Chapter notes. Issue 31, Mostly Harmless. See the end of the chapter 4. Notes. All Might stared at the scene with a furious expression. He'd had a bad feeling when Eraserhead and 13 hadn't returned his calls. Nedzu had accepted All Might's feelings on the matter, with a knowing look that suggested this lecture would be paid for later with interest. On his way to the USJ, he ran into young Ida, who had explained the situation to him. Villains attacking the USJ. The League of Supervillains is fighting the other villains. So of course he shot over to the USJ as quickly as he could. Ida had run back to the main campus to spread the word. The whole USJ looked like a battleground. Dozens upon dozens of villains were knocked out or down, or held within what looked like blobs of green rubber and ice. A huge burst of ice from the landslide zone was likely young Todoroki's work. 13 was in bad condition and Eraserhead had a broken arm. Most of the League of Supervillains were squaring off against a hulking brute of a villain with a man made of dark purple mist and another villain covered in hands. He could also see Melissa and a couple of other students, frozen in fear as the hand-covered villain turned away from them. All of this within the first second of getting here. Down below, at the fountain area, the villain covered in hands laughed. Oh, this is still salvageable. It isn't GG yet. The other villains looked at him oddly, then squared up. Why yeah, we're here to kill him. Stay alert dash. All Might swept through the villains in a couple of seconds, making it to Eraserhead. Are you fit to fight, Eraserhead? Eraserhead grunted, capture weapon writhing as he started making a sling for his arm. My arm's broken, but I can still use my quirk. The League of Supervillains. I know, they aren't a priority target. Looking at Mastermind, he paused. The villain was staring at him, which admittedly made sense. From Odd Eye's testimony and the memory of a handkerchief, the villain was a fan of his, of all things. Gentle Criminal and La Brava looked like they were about to pass out from sheer terror. If he hadn't known that they were fighting these other villains, he would have knocked them out with the rest of the scum. Still, there were other problems at hand. He swept in with his full speed, grabbing Melissa and the other students and sweeping them out of range. A stray blast of wind knocked the hand off the skinny villain's face. Shinsu and Tsuyu blinked, the tired-looking teenager looking around himself. Wait, how did we dash? Get to the entrance with Aizawa, students. I'll handle this. Melissa looked at him. Uncle Might, that brain villain took the full force of my punch dash she lowered her voice. I think he has multiple quirks. Probably a quirk to reduce impacts or similar as well as strength. He needs to be ordered by Shigaraki. All Might paused. So that confirmed who was behind this attack, at least. Then, he carefully reapplied his smile. Thank you for that. But never fear. If it was truly All for One's work, the bastard would pay. Mastermind stared at his future arch-nemesis as he flashed that signature smile. Behind him, Gentle Criminal leant on his cane, sweat pouring down his face. "I think I need to lie down," he muttered. Shigaraki grabbed the hand. "Ah, that's no good, father," he leered at All Might. "Throwing punches like that. Now we see the violence inherent in the system. You're still too fast to track, but you've definitely been nerfed." All Might grinned. "We'll see about that, villain." He shot at Shigaraki, arms crossed. Mastermind grinned. "Here it comes," he murmured. "Carolina." Mastermind followed through. Smash! His heart sank when he saw Numu suddenly appear to tank the Carolina smash like nothing happened. The hulking brute went in for a bear hug which All Might ducked under. Shigaraki laughed at that. "Numu's got shock absorption, All Might. His spect encountering your smash attacks. You'd have to tear him apart bit by bit to get him down." All Might grunted, never letting up on his smile. Mastermind shook himself. What the hell was he doing, standing on the sidelines like a useless nobody? He tapped his left gauntlet, the chamber at the top opening. Gentle looked at him as he cracked his neck. "Mastermind, what are you dash?" As All Might traded another blow with Numu, Mastermind charged at Shigaraki. "Hey, Shigaraki." He was hoping that this would work. Based on what he'd seen with that brainwashing student, Numu regarded protecting Shigaraki as its highest priority. "So, eat this." Mastermind turned on a relatively recent addition to his armor. Shigaraki got a brief glimpse of light, building up in the opening. Gentle Criminal looked at the item with a worried look. "You wanted to add this to your armor. Why?" Izuku cheerfully screwed the last component in place, double-checking the circuit boards. "Oh, just in case I need something like this. Plus, it was fun to work on it." That didn't seem to reassure his friend. "You built a flamethrower." He hummed, checking it over. "Yep, I felt that as a premier supervillain, I should mimic some techniques of top-ranked heroes." He looked up, seeing Gentle's face. Izuku shifted slightly, his manic grin fading. "Well, it just seemed like a good idea." The older villain sighed. "I can't think of many situations that would require a flamethrower to be used. Then again, if it was a do-or-die situation." Fwoomph. Hitoshi stared as Mastermind's gauntlet spewed out fire at Shigaraki. When the hell did he have a flamethrower? Melissa cracked her knuckles. Based on the changes to his armor, ever since he did that heist in Mia. Hitoshi wanted to learn more, but then Numu suddenly appeared in the way of the flamethrower. Fire raged around it as it shielded Shigaraki, letting out a pained scream. The air filled with a smell, not unlike roast pork. Mastermind cut the flamethrower quickly. "Now, All Might." Numu emerged from the attack, smoking. Hitoshi retched slightly as he saw it stagger, pants scorched and upper torso covered in brutal-looking burns. It lunged at Mastermind. And then All Might was there. Mighty arms wrapped around the charred villain, All Might gritting his teeth and pile-driving the villain into the ground. Slam! Hitoshi gasped as he saw the column of smoke that erupted from that simple move nearly hit the roof of the USJ. "Holy shit," he muttered. Next to them, Eraserhead nodded. "I may not like his style, but there's no denying that he's in a league of his own." Hitoshi looked over at his teacher. In spite of his confident words, he could see his teacher's face. Rather than elated, Eraserhead looked tense. "What's dash?" Asui, probably Tsuyu now since they'd survived a villain attack together, watched the fight with a relatively calm expression. "I guess we were worried for nothing, Kiro." Hitoshi didn't feel so sure about that. After all, that thing was described as strong enough to fight All Might. Not just that, it had soaked up a punch from Melissa. The smoke from the pile-driver cleared, revealing All Might held still, a dark cloud of mist under him. Numu's head and torso poking out of the mist, huge hands gripping the number one's torso. And there was Shigaraki's mocking laughter, trying to immobilize Numu by driving him into the concrete. "Numu's just as strong as you, so that wouldn't have worked." Kurogiri stepped next to All Might, still clutching his head. "Well, All Might, Numu's job was to pull you through my gate, then I'll have to cut you in half. I suppose I'll have to clean the mess out of myself dash." He was cut off by Mastermind trying to punch him in the throat. Barely rolling out of the way, the misty villain managed to push himself up. Mastermind seemed to be staring directly at Shigaraki and Numu. "Get away from All Might." There wasn't any bombastic flair to his voice, just an ice-cold tone. Hitoshi shivered, seeing Mastermind discard his comedic guise for something closer to an actual villain was unsettling. Flanking him, Gentle Criminal and La Brava wore similarly serious expressions. Melissa looked at Aizawa, then back at the scene with an anxious yet determined expression. Sensei, I'm about to do something incredibly reckless. Aizawa and Hitoshi glanced over at each other. Aizawa's eyes widened. Melissa dash. Hitoshi choked on his spit when he saw Melissa charge at the villains once again. All might. She yelled, drawing the attention of Shigaraki and Mastermind. Aizawa turned to run, Hitoshi hesitating before following. Shinsu, stay with the rest of your classmates. Hitoshi shook his head, rushing forwards despite the danger. He wasn't going to just stand idly by, while one of his friends just charged into danger with no thought for their own well-being. Shigaraki leered as Melissa charged. Kurogiri whipped up in front of her, a gate opening. Foolishness. Gentle Criminal deftly charged at the villain, swooping in front of him with an elegant gesture. Don't do anything, you misty bastard. Hitoshi yelled, throwing out his quirk once more. Once more. Kurogiri ignored him. He reached a misty hand out. Several things happened extremely quickly after that. As Kurogiri loomed over Melissa, his arm bounced back. This surprised him enough for a huge explosion to smack him in the side. Bakugo followed his initial attack up by slamming the misty villain to the ground by his collar, a feral grin on his face. Gentle looked, then quickly leapt in the air. The reason for this became apparent when the Numu froze, literally. Ice crept up its side as a familiar voice spoke. The quiet boy with red and white hair walked over with a purposeful stride, keeping an eye on Numu as he did. You really think you can kill All Might, don't you? Too bad, scum like you could never manage that. All Might pulled himself free, giving Shouto a thumbs up. Thank you, my boy. Shigaraki dodged out of the way of Mastermind trying to hit him, and then barely avoided Kirishima's sudden karate chop to the head. Almost had him. Kirishima yelled. The hand-covered villain growled and reached for Kirishima, only for Gentle to dart past. The villain's hand caught on the air. Impossibly. Shaking his head, Shigaraki managed to recover. Calmly, he pushed himself up, staring at the group. Hitoshi sighed. It looked like everything had turned around. Still, he kept his guard up with erase ahead. After all, anything could happen at this point. And Shigaraki was still eerily calm. All Might stared down Shigaraki and Numu. The hand-covered villain was definitely a lackey of all. For one, the question now was how he was going to capture the man. Shigaraki scratched his neck. Well, you've locked down our escape route. That's a problem. Not only that, but you're all at full health. Eraserhead glared at him. Surrender, Shigaraki. You can't hope to win this. Rather than respond to that, Shigaraki just sighed, dusting himself off. Numu, ganked the explosive. Brat, we need our escape route back. All Might tensed when he saw Numu rip itself free from the ice, pieces of its flesh falling off. The League of Supervillains shouted in alarm, Gentle looking queasily at it. From behind him, he saw Melissa's eyes widening when it started growing new limbs, its burnt skin already looking healthier. Like you thought, Melissa, it's got multiple quirks. Eraserhead tried to erase its quirk, but Shigaraki was on the move, lunging towards young Kirishima. Numu shot for Bakugo at the same time as Shigaraki was reaching a hand towards the young man. As if in slow motion, All Might watched as Shigaraki clamped a hand on Kirishima, only to leer when nothing happened. Numu barreled towards Bakugo, who barely managed to raise his head. In that split second, All Might was already in Numu's way. He quickly moved Bakugo out of the way, then braced for the impact. Numu's fist swung round. Kabam! Shigaraki glared at the brat, shoving him away. Well, he rasped, staring where All Might had been hit. How noble of you, All Might. The number one stood there, slightly worse for wear. Your friend doesn't know how to pull his punches, does he? What a frustrating boss to deal with. Anything to save a comrade, right? I mean, that girl came at me with everything she had, trying to force a 1v1. But in the end, violence breeds violence. Shigaraki glared at All Might. It just pisses me off, you know? In this whole game of life we level up with violence, but we all just get labeled good guys, bad guys. In the end, your whole faction is just a tool to keep people down. Slap. Shigaraki bounced along the ground a couple of times, feeling father come off his face once more. He touched his cheek gingerly, wincing at the pain, then glared up at his assailant. Mastermind stood there, panting heavily. His hand was still in a slapping position. The supervillain loomed over Shigaraki, shaking. For a brief instant, Shigaraki saw a dark-haired man with an angry expression on his face, superimposed over Mastermind. The sight filled him with inexplicable rage. Melissa and the rest of the students present stared at this confrontation. Mastermind stood over the fallen Shigaraki, trembling. You can't talk about heroes, about people like that. All Mights. Nothing like you. You're just using that as an excuse to hurt people. He clenched a fist. Try that again, Shigaraki, and I will hurt you. Shigaraki, for his part, sat on the ground glaring at Mastermind, chapped lips twisted into a grimace of rage. Really? Some pathetic villain like you. While this was happening, All Might held out a hand. Students, fall back with Aizawa. For his part, Aizawa quickly gestured for them to come back. Stay out of his way. Todoroki was the first to speak. If it wasn't for me I wouldn't be talking, I know. All Might gave him a thumbs up. You need to see a pair of pros get serious. Shigaraki's eyes were filled with an unholy fire. Numu, Kurogiri, kill All Might. I'm going to kill this bastard as slowly and painfully as I can. Numu lumbered forwards, blank eyes focusing on him. Kurogiri tried to follow, but Gentle was upon him. A swipe of his hand, and suddenly Kurogiri bounced away with an undignified scream. Gentle grinned. It seems that your mist counts as one object for the purposes of my quirk. The dapper warp villain was unable to meaningfully respond. All Might glanced over at Eraserhead. The taciturn hero made no complaints, instead glaring at Numu. Then All Might met the beast head-on. Kabam! The wind pressure knocked Shigaraki away, the villain sighing as All Might's fist met Numu's yet again. Staring in the background, Mastermind and the other villains were barely holding in place, the air in front of them stretching as some sort of makeshift barrier. It's no use, All Might. Did you forget that Numu's got shock absorption? All Might grinned at that. Does he now? Before Shigaraki could respond, Numu met him blow for blow, but All Might pushed harder and harder. You said he was built to counter what I could do, right? Numu grunted in pain as it was forced back. It fought wildly, without coordination and the compensation of hyper-regeneration or shock absorption. All Might strode forwards, not letting up the barrage of blows. I guess I'll have to go. Beyond those limitations. Numu tried to fight back, but without shock absorption to absorb most of the blows, it was futile. More and more punches got through, the hulking villain unable to meaningfully respond. Plus, Ultra. With one last blow, Numu stood still for a second. Then it rocketed away, shooting through the dome of the USJ to land somewhere else. All Might stood there, panting. He had maybe 30 seconds left. Before he would transform back, he'd just managed to avoid pushing himself too far. He cast a wary eye over to Mastermind, who stared at the scene, frozen. What was going through the villain's mind right now? Mastermind, Izuku, was taken aback. He'd seen All Might go all out. Nothing could have made him happier. His radio crackled. Mastermind, it's Mr. Compress. What just happened? All Might, he muttered. Thank God the camera in his helmet had recorded everything, otherwise he would have never forgiven himself. On the other end, Mr. Compress swore. I've got the escape vehicle ready. Are we ready to go? Mastermind watched Shigaraki as he gaped. Not just yet. All Might, his amazing arch-nemesis, gave Shigaraki his signature grin. Surrender, villain. Unless you'd like to go another round. Shigaraki scratched at his neck furiously. You dirty cheater. Kurogiri managed to stumble back. Sir, we should go, he groaned. His misty eyes crossed, and he held a hand to his mouth. Thank everything it wore off. Shigaraki twitched. Did Sensei lie to me? Oh, if only we had another Numu. He glared at Eraserhead. That wasn't a fair fight, you bastard. Having a support character like Eraserhead was cheating. Mastermind glared at him. It's as my arch-nemesis said, Shigaraki. Do you want to continue? The inferior villain's head snapped around to him. And then there's you. He twitched. Kurogiri twitched. All Might did take some damage, and the kids are holding back, he managed to get out, sounding marginally better. Still, we should leave before reinforcements come. Shigaraki continued glaring at Mastermind, pupils shrunken to hateful pinpricks. Maybe, but this annoying-ass miniboss is still here. I may not be able to kill All Might, but at least he won't get in the way. Mastermind tensed as suddenly Kurogiri's mist spilled out. Gentle tried to reach for it, only to pull his hand back quickly as Shigaraki swiped his hand through the warp gate. His hand brushed on the ground, and they had to leap back when the ground cracked and crumbled to dust. Eraserhead glared at the dark figure, trying to erase the warp gate but was distracted by the other approach. Shigaraki approached the Erasure hero at blinding speed. Mastermind charged, trying to get to Shigaraki. Out of the corner of his eye he saw Melissa charging at Shigaraki, the villain leering as he reached out to touch her. A gunshot rang out. Shigaraki howled as a bullet pierced his hand, forcing him to tumble back. "Sorry, everyone," came a familiar drawl. Mastermind briefly boggled. That was Snipe. When? We brought everyone we could. Mastermind couldn't believe his eyes when he saw how many heroes from school had come. Snipe tipped his hat with his gun, staring down at the remains of the League of Villains. Midnight held her whip provocative, flanked by present MIC and Majima-sensei. Ectoplasm and Cementos brought up the rear. Vladkin glared down at the assembly, seriousness only slightly diminished by Nedzu, sitting on his shoulder cheerfully. Shigaraki froze, only to get smashed in the gut by Melissa taking her opportunity. Mastermind blinked, then a devious grin crossed his face. Might as well get a good kick in. Eraserhead winced when he saw Shigaraki fold up due to Mastermind's boot connecting with his groin. The hand-covered villain hobbled, somehow still conscious. Kurogiri, apparently seeing this as the final straw, managed to pull Shigaraki through the mist. Eraserhead whipped around to try and erase the villain's warping quirk, but his goggles had fallen off, and the dust from Shigaraki's decay quirk quickly met his abused eyes. "I'm going to murder you." Shigaraki managed to wheeze as he was pulled back. He pointed a trembling finger at Mastermind. "You're fucking dead." Mastermind posed dramatically. "Mwahaha. You think you can stop the League of Supervillains? Bring it on, loser." Eraserhead sighed, glaring over at All Might. The number one watched with an unusual expression, having tensed up to try and move only to stop. Mentally Eraserhead groaned. Of course All Might had nothing left. Maybe a bit of movement and an attack, if he was lucky. Eraserhead was unable to do anything else as the last of the dark purple mist vanished. He spared a glance at the rest of his students as they let out sighs of relief. "It's over," Shinsu breathed. No, Eraserhead thought to himself. It's not over yet. Mastermind stood in the center of the USJ, dusting his hands off. Gentle Criminal and La Brava stood nearby, watching the heroes warily. Eraserhead glanced back at his students, then to Melissa. "Get away from Mastermind and fall back with the rest of the students." Melissa looked over to All Might. "But Dash." Eraserhead's eyes flashed red. "Come back now." Bakugo opened his mouth, then closed it when he saw Eraserhead's expression. At least the explosive blonde boy had some sense in his head. A few teachers dashed off to the other areas in the USJ to aid the students and deal with any remaining villains. A couple, in particular the principal, Vlad and Cementos, remained. Reluctantly, Melissa came back. The three members of the League of Supervillains traded a glance with each other. Mastermind was the one who spoke next. "Well, heroes, forgive our intrusion. We truly didn't mean to come here. And now," he turned as if to go, "we will be taking our leave." All Might managed to step in Mastermind's way. "Not so fast, supervillain." His grin seemed fairly natural despite the absurdity of the situation. "Now, I will admit that you were a major help today. However, you are still a villain." He gave an apologetic shrug. "I cannot let you escape justice for your past crimes. While this incident will help reduce your sentence, it will not be enough for you to avoid persecution." Mastermind nodded. "I am well aware of that, All Might. However," Eraserhead caught a glimpse of something far in the distance, coming from the ruins zone of the USJ. It zoomed forwards, revealing itself to be Mastermind's personal vehicle. The body was large, enough to house the entirety of the League of Supervillains if needed. Colored teal and black with red hubcaps, the new vehicle screeched to a stop. Golden Grin poked his head out, letting out a small eep when he saw the assembled heroes. Mastermind posed dramatically. That is rather contingent on catching us, isn't it? Internally, Mastermind was panicking. The heroes were focusing closely on them, and All Might was right there. His hero Gotch Nemesis stared, his grin seeming forced. Steam emanated from his body. You believe you can escape us in this? The other heroes were on the move. Mastermind saw Snipe aiming his gun carefully at the tires. Midnight readying herself to tear a sleeve to release her signature gas. Behind him, Gentle Criminal. And La Brava stared at the coming gathering of heroes. Mastermind, La Brava muttered. Well, he'd wanted to save this surprise. But if he had to reveal it, MWR. Foolish. Heroes, you haven't even seen my greatest creation yet. He signaled discreetly to Golden Grin. The golden-skinned villain pressed a button on the dashboard, causing a large ray gun to unfold from the roof of the car. Parts of it glowed an ominous red. Immediately the heroes sprung to action. Snipe fanned the hammer of his custom revolver, the bullets torpedoing towards the device. Gentle Criminal had already leapt in the way, the air itself stretching then sending the bullets curving off, only to suddenly return to hit the main body of the car, bouncing off like skipping stones. Midnight tore her sleeve off, releasing a pink mist that flowed down to the villains, narrowly missing All Might. Oh, no you don't, she cried, the other heroes watching carefully. What an opportunity. Mastermind's air filters immediately kicked in, Gentle Criminal hastily applying his own gas mask. A collection port on his gauntlet sucked some of the gas in to study its chemical composition as he strode towards the Mastermobile, Mark II. He saw present MIC wind up a scream. Behold! Zwerp! A red beam of light shot out, bathing the heroes up at the top of the stairs in its warm glare. Present. MIC leaned forwards to unleash his quirk. Yeah, he yelled. No deafening burst of sound resulted. From his quirk, every hero stared at him. Present MIC. Nedzu questioned. The voice hero looked startled, checking. My quirk. It's dash his eyes widened. Mastermind grinned. Yes. Heroes, behold, the erase ray. MWA. The rest of the League of Villains stared at the pair of inventors as they went over the various pieces. Of gear included. Izuku looked over at his clone. So, you made the erase ray portable. That's great. I mean, I didn't think it would happen so quickly. His double nodded. Oh, yeah. He held out an item that looked like a flashlight. The erasure. Effect, now in handy, easily portable size. Izuku turned it over. So, how long can it keep the erasing effect up? Double's happy grin faded slightly. Oh, about 30 seconds. Izuku hummed, tossing it in the air. I suppose 30 seconds before needing to recharge in the same time is okay for a first attempt dash. 30 seconds hooked up to a plasma reactor. Double winced. Then it needs to shut down for about an hour due to the cooling requirements. So don't use it for longer than about 10 or so seconds. The testing for the erase ray had been pretty horrible. They'd been fortunate that the light didn't give people cancer, but the power and cooling requirements had proven harder. Izuku had found a solution that increased the length of time it could go by emitting light as waste energy, which had the additional bonus of looking suitably villainous. Izuku barely managed to catch it. With a reactor. We aren't made of reactors. Those are really hard to replace. I mean, does this thing have a reactor inside it, at least? Double shuffled his feet. No. When Izuku asked why not, Double shrugged. It'd ruin the look of the thing if it was. I know. I tried everything to make it more efficient. We need to get some better parts to make it small enough to carry one-handed. Izuku nodded. Well dash. Inkblood idly crunched a chip. So why not make it larger? In fact, why make it handheld in the first place? Izuku and Double turned to look at her, confused expressions a mirror of the other. Because I could. Double offered. Inkblood pressed a hand to her temple. Right. Is that always the best option? Izuku and Double looked away. No, they said in a defeated tone. Mr. Warp looked over the device. So, are you going to keep the handheld version on you? Izuku nodded. I mean, it'll be a good surprise tool. Plus, well, I still like the idea. Double nodded. But on the other hand, a good, old-fashioned huge beam weapon is hard to pass up. Izuku cracked his knuckles. Given its efficiency problems, maybe we should mount it on the car. While we get better materials for the handheld version, iron out the problems, that kind of thing. All Might wanted to move and deal with this weapon, but it was taking everything he had to stay in. His hero form. He hadn't expected Mastermind would have something like this. The green and red. Supervillain laughed maniacally, a pinky finger pressed to where his mouth would be. Behold the fruits of science. The school staff glanced at each other, then they charged, snipe firing a couple more shots to try and pop the tires. Hound Dog led the group, Nedzu on his shoulders. Mastermind hurried into the vehicle, though not before making one last taunt. Remember this, heroes. This is the day that you almost caught Mastermind and the League of Supervillains. The vehicle sped off, the ray swiveling to focus on the heroes chasing the vehicle. The robots piled in after their master, skittering into the vehicle. Nedzu looked at the rest of his teachers, directing them. Ectoplasm, Khan, Cementos. Make sure the students are safe. The pair of heroes acknowledged, splitting off. Outside of the swathe of light, Ectoplasm managed to produce more clones, who hurried into the rest of the USJ. All Might winced when he saw Kirishima. Come closer. All Might, are you okay? That Numu guy really did a dash. Cementos quickly threw up a wall of concrete around All Might. Kirishima, it would be best if you reported back to the entrance with your teacher. I'll handle All Might. Yes, Eraserhead drawled. He glanced at Melissa, who looked down at her shoes. He then sighed. Melissa, you ran into a hostile situation without thinking. I know dash. I will not encourage you to do that again. He sighed, but I won't deny that it probably saved his life. His flat stare bored into her eyes. Don't make a habit of endangering yourself. Melissa nodded stiffly, then followed Eraserhead back up the stairs. All Might watched his students go, then sighed. Releasing his hold on his quirk, he gave Cementos a thumbs up. I'm truly grateful, he wheezed. Think nothing of it, All Might. The square teacher looked out at the commotion. The vehicle, containing the villains, had headed to the mountain zone. Without a doubt, he's the worst villain we've ever seen. Toshinori Yagi limped over for a checkup. Inkblot stared down the hero in front of her. They almost looked like an ordinary guy in business. Casual, except for the blindfold-like mask and lurid color scheme. So, she drawled, getting ready to fight. Out of the corner of her eye she could see the master mobile getting closer. Do I get time off? My sentence for good behavior. The three students behind the teacher watched her warily. Earjack Girl and Ponytail looked at their teacher. She did help us fight the villains here, the Ponytail Girl, Yoro Orozu, said, casting a worried glance. The hero nodded, looking around the battlefield. So I can see. Various villains lay about, groaning. The electrical villain shifted slightly in her grip, one eye swollen shut. I did not get paid enough for this shit. Inkblot tensed as the hero presented a pair of handcuffs. While we are thankful you saved our students, behind his blindfold his eyes glowed a bright purple. It doesn't excuse your villainous activities dash. Beep beep. Inkblot grinned when the master mobile zoomed over, red light bathing the hero and students. Holy shit, that was close, she yelled, leaping into the vehicle. Dropping the electric villain, she grinned. When she saw the hero try and use his quirk, she cheerfully waved goodbye to the stunned hero. Students, before the door slammed shut. So Mastermind, what's the plan? The master mobile sped off, Mastermind now behind the wheel. Simplicity itself. We added a couple of new functions dash. Inkblot chanced a glance outside and choked when she saw nice, polite Yaro Orozu pull out a goddamn cannon. She'd ran outside of the erase area. We should get going dash. The cannon fired, the master mobile managing to weather the blow. Inkblot grit her teeth, seeing the girl start to reload. Now would be good. Mastermind grinned, speeding the car up, tapping another button, echoing throughout the USJ. Eurobeat started to play. On top of Hound Dog, Nedzu cheerfully watched Mastermind drive back from the landslide area. Well now, Mastermind, how do you plan to evade me? Idly he pressed a button on the remote in his hand. The landslide zone triggered another rock slide, forcing Mastermind to steer away. Another button press and the defense systems activated. Nedzu grinned as various missile launchers and Gatling guns activated, training their sights on the intruders. Normally these would have been on standby with intruders in the building, but the alarms were still down. Having to manually operate them was still an option though. With the students out of the way, More dangerous methods could be employed. Rocket salvos fired at the car, barely missing. The rubble flew up, blocking off the main entrance. Nedzu's grin turned sadistic. Now, there are a couple of other exits out of here. Another tap of a button and the nearest emergency exit was blocked off from them. Now, what will you do? There were a couple of possibilities Nedzu had considered already. The villains could employ their warper to get out, or they could deploy additional weapons to try and blast through. They hadn't left. With the other villains, though that would have been quite unlikely. There were a couple of other options, but Nedzu had dismissed them as equally unlikely. Rather than the first couple of options, the Master Mobile sprouted wings. Nedzu's eyebrow raised as the wheels of the vehicle folded outside the main body. The erase ray was still in effect, preventing his teachers from unleashing a long-range attack against the vehicle as it lifted off, a rocket booster, firing to shoot through the hole in the dome the Numu had left. I will admit I was not expecting that, but I was expecting not to expect something, so it doesn't count. Inkblot laughed, grinning. A flying car. Izuku nodded. The wheels double as rotors. Combined with the prototype diamagnetic levitators, it should be enough to levitate us out of there at vehicular speeds. I mean, it's not like it's hard to make. Or anything dash. Gentle Criminal shook his head. Not difficult for you, maybe, but even seeing it I can't believe it. Would work. La Brava nodded, eyes wide. When Mastermind had floated the idea, she'd been inclined to laugh about it. The double patted the side of the Master Mobile. That's why we redesigned it a bit. It's sleeker in the air now, closer to a plane. The rest of the League of Supervillains hummed. So, why do we need a flying car again? Mr. Compress asked politely. In response, Izuku and his double stared at him, confused. Because. Double then hopped over with an oily thumbs up. Just in case we need to use the new Master Mobile on the latest job, I'd like you to hold on to it. Wait for the right opportunity to use it. Mr. Compress tapped his chin. I have to admit, flying away would be novel. Nobody would expect it. Nedzu stared at the car as it left, grinning. Midnight was the first to speak, an amazed look on her face. They have a flying car. Present MIC was, for once in his life, speechless. Nedzu grinned heartily. I'll inform the aerial security team that we have an intruder. Still, I was not expecting a flying car from Mastermind. His grin turned feral. How very exciting. He started to cackle, the teachers around him giving him a wide berth. Oh, yes. Now he knew Mastermind would do something like that. Well, time was to update his record. Today was embarrassing for UA, that was for sure. He'd grown complacent. He'd have to think of new defenses, new traps. And if All for One thought he could mess with his students, then Nedzu was ready for him. Shigaraki roared in a mixture of pain and rage as he flopped out of the portal. That bastard. I want him dead. Not just that, I want his friends dead. His family dead. Anybody who so much as sold him. Takoyaki dead. This would have been more intimidating if his voice hadn't been several octaves higher than it normally was. Oh dear, Tomura, Sensei purred. Were you unsuccessful in killing All Might? Tomura shook his head. He stomped Numu, but that's not the biggest issue. Mastermind interfered. He followed us through and he ruined everything. His hands twitched convulsively, wanting nothing more than to wrap around the bastard's neck and throttle him. Numu got knocked away by All Might and our cannon fodder got wiped by the kids. And the League of Stupid Villains. Well, that is unfortunate, Tomura. But after this, we can rebuild. Sensei sounded like he was grinning. Learn from this defeat, Tomura. Gain stronger allies, and become a true symbol of villainy. To thwart All Might. Tomura scowled. All Might. No, I hate that bastard Mastermind more than him. And once you kill All Might, then, wait. What? Chapter end notes. AN. This gave me a bit of grief. I knew how they would escape, but getting the pieces in play with Numu smashing was hard. Still, I am happy with the end result. So Shigaraki has determined who his target is. That's good. Honestly, I might take a bit of a break from this, get my ideas lined up. I have an outline for what I want. It's just a matter of applying it. Next time, we'll get in the jam cooldown. See you then.